An inexplicable disease affecting the entire body came out of nowhere. No one knew how to get rid of this ailment. After infection, disgusting growths appeared on the body, after which the body became numb and turned to stone, and eventually it simply collapsed and turned to dust. Because of this disease, rumors began to spread that those who were sick were dealing with the devil himself. Those in whose families the sick were identified completely lost their status. The very existence of these people was under threat. The disease mowed down both ordinary peasants and high-ranking aristocrats. It did not care about status, even for people like Karen Witta. The heroine of this story was very similar to the Duke's daughter, possessing light green hair and honey-colored eyes. It was the color of her eyes and hair that allowed her, a street ragamuffin, to become a replacement for the late Karen Witta. She was just a baby then, when the Duke promised that if she could cope with the role of his daughter, she would never need anything. She had nothing to her name, and he, the richest man in the empire, offered her a deal. Then the little girl thought, did she really get a chance and let her brothers and sisters make fun of her? Let the servants not pay attention to her. Hope still lived in this girl, and she promised to play her role to the end. One day, her adoptive mother announced that she would marry the Grand Duke of Hexion, which was a great success for an illegitimate child, as she would receive nothing from her family anyway. All these years, our heroine considered herself a tramp picked up from the street. But it turns out she really was the daughter of a duke. However, for the daughter of a noble family, the wedding procession was very modest. In the carriage, the girl sadly thought that it would be better if she remained in ignorance. Everything was predetermined from the very beginning, and this marriage was a deal. There were even rumors that the devil himself had cursed him. But the bride tried to reassure herself as best she could that everything would be fine and ordered herself to be strong. Perhaps she can now finally start a new life. She spent the last 10 years of her life in the duchy, so starting life from scratch will be difficult. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by the neighing of horses. The carriage overturned. The girl was barely conscious. Her thoughts were only about getting out. One of the soldiers pulled her out. The rest stood nearby. Just when she thought that she had been saved and found, she saw that the guard was dead. Horror was reflected on her face. With a dry tongue, our heroine began to demand that she be released, appealing to the fact that she was the Duke's daughter. But the soldier grinned and called her a fake who talked too much. For the girl whom everyone knew as Karen, this was a shock, and these guys definitely can't be knights, given their manners and rude speech. She asked who they were and why they were wearing the armor of the Duke's knights. And the answer was that she was quite smart for someone who would soon die. Her head was spinning. They hadn't even had time to get married. Wasn't this marriage so necessary for the Duke and the imperial family to establish good relations? Until the Duke had another daughter, she could still be useful. While she frantically thought that the Duke would not benefit from her death, one of the knights dressed as a knight told her from the Duke that she had done an excellent job of her role. Then came death, before which the girl had time to think whether she had been too naive in dreaming of receiving at least a little love. After all, while he needed her, there was still such hope. Then, as a little girl, with all her childish sincerity, she wanted to help him as long as she could. And even though he doesn't consider her his own daughter, she wished for the fading consciousness to turn back time. Let everything plunge into eternal darkness, behind which she heard someone calling Adele, after which the voice said that it was her time to turn back. And then she opened her eyes, hearing the chirping of birds and a bright light shining in her eyes. She stood up, trying to catch her breath and comprehend what had just happened. The maid Bella chirped about how wonderful the weather was today. Her temples were throbbing, as if all this couldn't be real. Had she really managed to escape? Looking at her hand, she saw that the scar had disappeared. Bella reported that today, Mr. Paris is returning from the academy, so the lady needs to get ready quickly. The girl felt hot. Didn't Paris graduate from the academy 2 years ago? She seemed to be speechless and did not answer until the maid called her. Looking at Bella, our heroine shuddered even more, because she had also changed this uniform 2 years ago and asked the maid what year it was. She, of course, was clearly taken aback by such a question, but replied that it was now the 475th year since the creation of the great empire, and again began to rush to get ready. So our heroine realized that she had gone back in time 3 years ago. It was unrealistic, beyond all common sense, but everything points to the fact that time has turned back. All that remains is to accept this reality. In 3 years, she will leave this house for a political marriage, which means that next year, the heiress of this house, her sister, will be born. And when her sister appears, she herself will become unnecessary. And to prevent fate with a tragic ending from repeating itself, She must run away. For now, she played her assigned role as always. To please them, she tightens her corset and puts on a beautiful dress. And step by step, he moves towards these cold glances. Habitually wishing good morning to his mother and father, the mother looked at her with a cold gaze. There stands the older brother, also looking distantly. He doesn't respond to her greeting with a word. A minute later, he choked out a word and answered the question that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and, as always, didn't look into the eyes. Not only does he not look her in the eye, he doesn't even look her in the eye, but she doesn't care anymore. As far back as she can remember, he's always been like this. How often had she looked to him for support when she was being bullied by servants or other brothers, but he simply ignored her. Paris simply gave her a cold look. So why was she so desperate for their attention? After trying in vain to win her father's love, she died at his hands. He must have laughed at her stupidity for a long time. Now, previously, she had to sit at the table for up to 2 hours. But today, she finished in 10 minutes. Especially since it seems like they don't care. The girl remembered that it seemed that at this time of year a hunting competition began. During the hunt, young ladies give colorful tassels decorated with beads and pearls. They give them to their suitors or knights to whom they show favor. So as not to arouse suspicion, it is worth doing everything as last time. Adele sadly remembered that she had never given this brush to anyone, deciding that it should be given to the knight who had won last year. The girl decided that she needed to somehow leave the house unnoticed to go and buy these brushes. In general, our heroine's memories of this time are rather vague, so slipping past the servants, she aimed to put her thoughts in order. Before she could leave, Bella began looking for her, asking the servants where Mrs. Karen had gone. Seeing our heroine, her face distorted with anger, and she shouted that she had already searched. She read the one who had been portraying Karen, the Duke's late daughter, for years. The maid was indignant at who had allowed her to wander around the estate like that. Adele remembered how her whole life, even the servants had treated her with disdain. One day, she felt unwell, and Bella did not allow her to get up, saying that she had reported her condition to the Duke. Then the girl couldn't even get a word in edgewise, and Bella was so angry with her, saying that her whining was causing her nothing but trouble. It became so offensive. Even in childhood, there was not a drop of warmth from her. As a child, she often made her cry, and the girl decided that it was time to pay her back in the same coin. Our heroine looked at Bella and asked why she couldn't walk around the palace wherever she wanted. Bella seemed to explode, bawling that Karen was such a selfish person, and why should she explain such elementary things, and why she behaved like that in general. After which, in the same calm voice, she told Bella to close her mouth, and her next action was a hefty and resounding slap in the face as retribution for all the pain and humiliation since childhood. While a stunned Bella, wide-eyed and trying to comprehend what had just happened, she heard from our heroine that she should show more respect. The maid stared madly at Adele and screamed that her mistress was crazy. Adele declared that she was doing what she had always wanted to do, ordering Bella to kneel and beg for forgiveness. She would only give such an arrogant creature a chance once. At the Duke's house, Adele ate only salads all the time, because for some reason, any other food made her feel sick. The girl savored every bite, enjoying the wonderful food. She had already forgotten how delicious food could be, and when anything ever brought her pleasure, she decided for herself that although it was dangerous, she no longer intended to play the role of Karen Witta. She had some savings which Adele decided to spend on food and various little things. Her imagination drew pictures of what she would do when she gained freedom, because she could open a restaurant or even an inn. She could also become an archaeologist, but to do something like that, she needs to join the Adventurers Guild, and she needs to meet Jin, if he still remembers her. Once she gets out of here, many paths will open up for her. It's good that she devoted herself to her studies so much, as if her whole life depended on it. Foreign languages, ancient languages, and even pharmacology. As a child, she often got nosebleeds after fights. However, because of my studies, this happened for the first time. And for Adele, there was one constant intention that she should try, and every time she gave the Duke her work, her heart expected to hear that he was pleased. She looked at him with such hope, how she wanted him to recognize her as his daughter. The Duke didn't shout, didn't lose his temper. He simply looked at her with a phlegmatic gaze and said that even such a trifle was beyond her strength. Afterwards he left, simply closing the door. Now she understood how naive she had been. In her father's eyes, she did not live up to the status of his daughter, but he still allowed her to take part in the hunting competition. The girl was so happy and wanted to make the most beautiful tassels for her father and brother. She went to the store early to buy a popular color of tassels. She bought the most popular color and went home so inspired. In the end, she never managed to give them away. All the guests only whispered about her, the young daughter of the Witt family. Paris accepted many gifts from other ladies. People whispered that she had no one to give her brush to. Even family members did not accept her gift. That same day, she didn't even get a chance to catch a glimpse of her father. He was too busy. All these memories flashed through her mind when she once again went into the store to buy materials. The seller was upset because she had already sold all the most popular colors. Adele said that it wasn't that important. She didn't need beautiful ones. She asked to see everything that was left, and, having touched the black material, decided that since the previous winner was wearing black armor, then black would be suitable. The girl asked to wrap 2 skeins of black. I also bought beads for decoration. The woman so sweetly asked her to wait while she prepared everything. Adele was taken aback. She wasn't used to being treated like that. She thanked me, and her heart felt so good. Our heroine returned home quite late. The Duke stood at the window all this time and watched her as she walked into the house. He noted to himself the changes in this girl. I remember Paris mentioned this recently when he asked if something had happened to her, but the Duke replied that absolutely nothing had happened. And now, standing by the window and watching Adele, he admitted that this child really was behaving strangely. Without turning around, he said that it seemed like she knew something. Bella stood shaking and scared. The morning before the hunt arrived, a crew was already waiting for Adele. As she was going down, Bella called out to her. In an ingratiating tone, she said that the carriage was ready and asked permission to accompany him. Adele stopped and looked at the maid who was offering her help. Our heroine interpreted Bella's submissiveness as her decision to report everything to the Duke. Passing by, she said that she didn't need her help. All she has to do is grab the handle and walk inside. But for some reason, she became so uneasy. Her face became covered in sweat. When she was already sitting inside, this familiar voice calling her Karen said that he was coming in. The girl saw the Duke in shock. The carriage started moving. He rode with it, and it was strange. Our heroine was nervous because of the Duke. Her heart was ready to jump out of her chest. She remembered the voices of her killers, the Duke's order to seize her, and what he asked to convey about her role. The man broke the silence and turned to her, asking if she was feeling unwell, and if so, she needed to call a doctor and adjust her treatment. Adele began to realize what was happening and replied that he shouldn't worry, she wasn't sick. In front of her sat the man on whose orders she died, who now said that she had not called him father lately. The girl replied that she was only showing him respect, because every time I call him father, I saw only his face filled with anger. The Duke brought up the topic of her strange behavior lately, that she was not like herself. Adele smiled and asked His Excellency how she usually behaved. They arrived in the forest of Fulheim, announced the arrival of the Duke, where every few years a grand hunting competition is held. Both the offspring of noble families and knights gather there. Adele turned her head, looking for the knight in black armor. Dressed like that, he should have stood out, but he was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, my heart started beating wildly. It was him! He was in his black robes, tall and stately. The girl thought that perhaps the past had remained unchanged. For some, people walked back and forth, and Adele just stood there. Perhaps their eyes would meet. At this time, the Duke called her. Our heroine gasped and turned away for literally a second. But the knight in black was nowhere to be found. He seemed to have disappeared, dissolved into the crowd. And yet, there was still hope that she would still have time to meet him before the end of the tournament. Turning to the Duke and calling him father, the girl asked if he had called her. The Duke looked at her suspiciously. Now this girl called him father again. The man's eyes narrowed, and he noted to himself that, as expected, she was quite smart. He added once again that she should devote herself entirely to her role, and called her into the tent. During the hunting competition, the nobles live in tent camps decorated with the coats of arms of their families. That means she will have to spend her time in a tent with these people again. The girl thought sadly that she would have to endure all this for a whole week. At that moment, the maid called her and pointed to her tent. The maid reported that Mrs. Karen's mother had received a letter from Karan, who announced his return. This news seemed to burn Adele. That's right, she remembered it happened during the hunt. Karan returned just at the end of the competition. He was an outstanding swordsman mage who mastered both magic and weapons perfectly. Karan Vita, the second son of the Vita family. As a child, he always bullied her, once taking her pencil and saying that she had picked it up in the trash. The girl explained that she uses it during classes, but for him, it was just an excuse. Karan just went and broke it. He threw it on the floor and said that she should stop clinging to old things, and if she wanted that pencil so much, then let her pick it up and continue writing. And now Karan had to return. How could she forget about it? Before she had time to tell Bella that she wanted to eat, the maid immediately ran to carry out the order. And Adele remembered their last meeting with her brother as if it had happened yesterday. She fidgeted and was terribly nervous when Karan handed out the gifts. Knowing, I had to force a tired smile and assure her that everything was fine and she liked it. He stated with satisfaction that this was better and called her a good girl. Adele stood there, huddled up as if expecting to be hit by him, and her heart was pounding. Remembering that incident, the girl exhaled and grabbed her head, preparing for a new and at the same time old meeting, until the sheets of paper lying on the table flew down and she began to collect them. Adele's attention was drawn to the map. There were some notes there. She assumed they were for hunting. She got the idea to take them with her and take a good look at them. The hunt would end after noon. If she returned quietly, then no one would notice. The girl decided to quickly grab a pen and slip away so as not to run into the Duchess. Besides, it would be boring at the camp. At this moment, a bright light hit our heroine's eyes. The Duchess came in and looked at her intently. Noticing that the girl shuddered, the woman said that she looked as if she was hiding something and asked what she was planning. Adele was silent. Then the Duchess told her that she would not even greet her. The girl tried to crumple and discreetly hide the card, and, without looking at the Duchess, said that she never liked greetings anyway. When the taken-aback woman asked again, Adele looked her in the eyes and said, "But isn't she right?" In response, the Duchess gave her a resounding slap. Our heroine almost choked, opened her mouth and shouted at the Duchess to stop when she was about to leave the tent. But she pushed her away roughly and hit her again. And then she coldly told her not to dare to be insolent to her anymore. Adele was shaking all over and rubbing her cheek, which was red from the blow. She could only say that she would go and take a little walk, but she herself rushed to run as fast as she could. Not remembering how far she had run, Adele froze to catch her breath, choking on tears. Only after looking around did she discover that she was in the forest. Finally, she came to her senses. The forest really was magical, but blocking out the blinding stream of sun rays, she discovered a strange boulder. In front of her stood an obelisk covered with writing. It amazed her with its size, and it was marked on the map. Running her hand over it, she concluded that the writing was in an ancient language. She had no desire to return to the camp, and began to copy the symbols from the obelisk. She had already managed to read some of them. Someone had left a message in the hope that these notes would be useful to someone. Adele also really wanted this. The girl came to her senses when the sun was already setting. It was already late, and it was time to return. Before she could take a step, she heard a growl behind her. All shaking with fear, she tried to find the source of the sound. She needed to run. Someone was approaching, but you can't really run in her shoes, so she decided to take them off. From the growling, she guessed that it was a wild animal, most likely a wolf. As soon as she took off her shoes, the wolf was already flying towards her, shaking everything with its growl. Adele turned around, realizing that she needed to run, but her body seemed not to obey. She slipped a little, and the beast's mouth was behind her. Having managed to look over her shoulder, she realized that she had made a mistake and lost time. He would soon be very close. She accelerated with all her might and immediately crashed into something hard and metallic. The knight in black armor pressed her to himself and covered her eyes with his hand. He stretched out his hand and stopped the rushing wolf. She stood there, barely breathing, unable to move from fear. When the knight removed his hand and said that she no longer had anything to worry about, the girl saw the same knight in black, and he declared that it was a great honor for him to meet Lady Karen. It was incredible to Adele that the knight had ended up here at such a late hour. He asked anxiously if she was okay, and the girl thanked her savior. The knight reported that everyone had found her, and that it was time for her to return to camp before night fell. The girl was completely confused by his question about what brought her into the thicket of the forest. She knew that he would ask this question, but he answered for her with the understanding that everyone should have time when they want to be alone. After which, the knight pointed to the road that would lead her to the camp. Adele asked anxiously, wouldn't he go with her? He replied evasively that he had to look around, and that he would visit her later, and told Lady Karen to return. Suddenly, it dawned on her that there was a brush and she could give it to him. Handing him the brush, she asked, looking at him with hope, whether he would accept it. It was the same tassel, made of black material and decorated with pearls. The knight was surprised why she was giving him a brush, since they didn't even know each other. Adele didn't know what to answer, why she was giving it to him. He was like some person from another world to her, because he remained in her memories, and even after returning from the past, she knew that he would become the winner of the hunt. but of course she couldn't tell him this. He was silent for a while, and then agreed with her, after which he spread his arms and asked her to put the tassel on him. A wave of shock washed over Adele. She didn't understand how to put it on. Seeing her expression, the knight in black decided to clarify the tradition. After all, ladies put it on their chosen ones themselves. Our heroine felt like a fool. Of course he was completely right. Pulling herself together, she walked over and put on the tassel, saying that she would pray for his victory. He gallantly took her hand and kissed it, saying that in that case, he would dedicate the victory to her. Adele seemed to be in a dream when the knight reminded her that it was time for her to return. Everyone was waiting for her. This man carefully held her and turned her in the right direction. Adele was still under the impression he didn't go anywhere, making it clear that he would watch until she found the right road. I didn't want to leave, as if I was waking up from a magical dream, but she had to obey, and the girl went to the camp. While she was walking, she turned around several times to see if he was standing there, and if this was all a dream. She was met by a frightened Bella, who started babbling about where she had disappeared to. Everyone was looking for her. Adele so wanted to return unnoticed, but now she realized that she was in big trouble. She was standing in a dirty and wrinkled dress, and Bella reported that the Duke was furious. She calmly walked past Bella, telling her to prepare a new dress, since this one was not suitable for hunting, and walked on as if nothing had happened. The Duke was waiting for her in his tent. Swallowing before this meeting, she asked permission for the late intrusion. The Duke ordered his knights to leave the tent, leaving him alone with his daughter. In cold notes that concealed barely controlled irritation, he asked her exactly what she was doing. The Duke, with a chuckle, sarcastically commented on her answer that the Duke's daughter went for a walk in the forest and then suddenly disappeared, forcing the knights to search for her. Adele shrank from his gaze and words when he began to ask, grinning, what she had been doing before her little walk, whether she had been performing duties like Karen Witta. She replied that she was only doing what she thought was necessary, and the glass shattered in the Duke's hand, and the shards flew around with a crash, and he barked out what it meant. He continued to belittle her, saying that he considered her quite smart, but now he sees that it seems she has gone out of her mind, and how dare she hit Bella? The Duke accused Adele of becoming arrogant because of her role, and reminded her of how she ended up in Karen's place. As calmly as possible, our heroine answered, if she stops playing the role, won't this create problems for his lordship? The grin of her so-called father turned out to be unkind. With an evil hint, he told her that he believed that if he stopped playing his role, then he would simply gain freedom and do whatever he wanted, in which case she would simply face death by starvation and nothing more. The Duke touched upon her childhood, poverty, hunger, and a fight over a moldy piece of bread from the garbage dump. In the end, he ordered her to know her place if she wanted to continue living the way she was living now, which meant she had to refrain from anything that would bring shame on their family. A broken plate followed, but Adele ordered herself to endure the Duke's shout that if she understood him, then she would stop causing trouble. The girl only had to hold out for 1 year, and in the meantime, a knight in black was making his way through the darkness of the night. He was breathing heavily, his breath was caught, his legs refused to move. The body began to shake as if in a fever, and the man realized that it was spreading too quickly. He looked at the little thing and whispered that it was because of it that the pain went away. Bella, having seen the maid off, she plopped down tiredly on the bed. How tired she was after the day. Her gaze, realizing that I needed a distraction, I decided to read the notes copied from the obelisk. The man wrote that he really hoped that someone would read his notes someday. He wrote that this was the history of the forest that he had been studying for so long. While Adele was reading this, she remembered that there was another excerpt from a fairy tale on the obelisk. It spoke of spirits that live deep within the forest, and from the hidden treasure of the ancient people. This is a place in which there is no end to the countless riches. As it turns out, somewhere there is a secret passage to the gnome village. Adele was so fascinated by this that she wanted to explore the entire forest if she had the chance. But I became scared when I remembered the terrible wolf. Her stomach twisted with fear. Today, she was on the verge of death. This had never happened before. Could it be that the future began to change because she was behaving differently? Everything was not like before her death, and falling asleep, she thought that she didn't want to die. Our heroine promised herself that she would never go into that forest again. But as soon as she closed her eyes, she immediately found herself in that forest. Or maybe it was the forest that was calling her. And so again she was dreaming about the forest when she was once again called, addressed as Lady Wit. The honey-haired girl giggled and asked what she was so engrossed in. Lady Vita was usually involved in their general conversation, reminding that, As if a personal servant, she always performed on a whim. Although her father, the Marquis, was a respected nobleman, he had a lot of problems because of her, and Adele even felt a little sorry for him. And the girl who sat next to Lady Alia, Lady Euclid. 6 months later, he will fall ill and die from that same unknown disease. Adele thought that if she told her about her imminent death, she would stop wasting time. Then she asked herself, if she thinks about it, why does she behave the same way as these girls? Instead of escaping from my father's plans, wouldn't it be better to start somehow differently? She heard some sounds and turned her head towards the forest. Our heroine promised herself to go there one last time. After all, if she left now, people would not stop gossiping behind her back, and these pathetic rumors would never reach the Duke. So she stood up and said that she had to leave them. She had urgent matters to attend to. The obelisk attracted not only her. 2 people in black robes stopped in front of him, saying that the reports were correct, but what they really needed to find. And for some reason, the obelisk began to collapse, and now Adele found herself near it. The girl began to rewrite the notes. She only had to decipher the last part. She heard some sounds, and she turned around and listened. She didn't see anyone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was nearby. I became scared. What if it was a wild animal again? She had the feeling that someone was watching her, and she decided not to make any unnecessary sounds. At that moment, a gloved hand fell on her shoulder. Adele jumped up and turned around with such a face that the knight in black standing there hastened to apologize, seeing how he had frightened her. Out of fear, the girl called him Sir Black Knight. He bowed, asking to accept his most sincere apologies. Then Adele began to justify herself that everything was fine. Adele decided to ask him what he was doing in the forest at such an hour. The man in the knight's costume replied that he had accidentally seen her, Lady Karen, going into the forest alone. In turn, Adele inquired whether he himself should not be in the hunting grounds right now. After all, this year he should become the winner. Has the future really changed because of her? This is of course not a significant change, but still. And then he confesses to her that he is more interested in her than in hunting grounds and hunting. He promised that he would do everything to not fall in the eyes of the lady. The knight apologized for disturbing her leisure time, and our heroine, in a businesslike tone, advised him to manage his time more rationally. She was sure that he had more important things to do. The man agreed that there were more important things to do. He wanted to look at the obelisk, and in response to the stunned Adele's words about the tournament, he innocently admitted that if she hadn't reminded him, he would have forgotten about it altogether. Still, the girl decided to get to the bottom of it. If competitions are held in this forest every year, then why was the obelisk of interest now? The knight responded that he had always believed that the purpose of this obelisk was to guide fellow travelers. Until our heroine shuddered at his suspicions that she could read the ancient language. He assured that he did not doubt her abilities. It was just that no one could read it, since the language was very ancient. Adele assumed that she could tell him, so she carefully revealed that she had deciphered only a little. The knight asked her to tell him what she had already deciphered. Adele thought that there was nothing wrong with it, so why not tell him? The man who wrote on the obelisk reported that if this story was deciphered to the end, it would be considered fascinating. The writer believed that in this way, a person wants to study the forest. And even though he traveled a lot around the world and saw a lot in his life, it was this that brought him the greatest joy. The record of his entire life is on this stone, and if the reader is pure, he will be able to find all the obelisks. Then the dear reader will become a better storyteller and perhaps understand that the tale is a lie, but there is a hint in it. He also warned her never to anger the master of the forest. The girl wondered what kind of master of the forest he was, some kind of bear or something. They were silent for a while after that, and the knight in black said that he wanted to know the continuation, and he didn't even know that there were more obelisks in this forest, but Adele knew about it because they were marked on the map. However, she was only able to get here thanks to the hunting competition. Despite the fact that she also wanted to know the continuation of the story, there was no reason to look for the rest of the obelisks and put her life in danger. Of course, if it were up to her, she would return and confess to the knight that she knows the location of the other obelisks. And then he offered to visit the forest with him twice a month if she was as curious as he was. What he just said seemed to hit a sore spot, and what could she answer him? His pressure became stronger. He declared that he would protect her. Adele thanked him, but refused, thinking that who she needed to protect herself from was him. A verbal altercation began between them, which ended in a draw. Still, barely containing her irritation, she asked why he was so interested in her, and it felt as if she had been fooled. The knight began to speak, but hesitated. The truthful answer was because she gave him a brush. This is what changed him that day. The symptoms of pain decreased. There was power in this hand, and he wanted to find the source of this power, and asked if Lady Karen made this hand with her own hands. A storm was raging inside Adele. She wanted to yell at him and say outright that he didn't like the gift, but instead she giggled sweetly and confirmed that she had made it herself. The knight tried to find out if she had used any special materials, but our heroine replied that she had used ordinary ones from the store. Adele, barely containing her rage, hissed that she saw that her gift was not to someone's taste. But there was no need to worry, she did not curse him. The man frightenedly denied that he was talking about that at all, but all he said was that his heart fluttered at the thought that she cared about him. It was so unexpected that the girl was embarrassed that she had made up all sorts of things. But for her part, in order not to delude him, she explained that there was simply no one to give the gift to, so she chose him. Afterwards, she made an official curtsy and said goodbye. He stopped her by telling her what was wrong with his delusion. Pointing to his heart, he tried to explain everything that was happening. Adele's words made him shudder. The girl tried to explain that he had misunderstood everything, and she gave him the brush as a sign of gratitude. The man retorted that no one would just make a black brush for no reason, so he thought that Lady Vita had specifically chosen the color that he liked. It turns out he jumped to conclusions. Adele mentally gasped. How spot on! Then he turned to his horse and said dejectedly that he just wanted to look at the other obelisks with her. He thought that she would deign to do such a small thing, but apparently he was mistaken. Listening to him, Adele wanted to help, but at the same time, she was angry that he decided that since he could ask, she would immediately run after him. Our heroine knew only one thing. This man would become the winner of the competition. Today is the last day of the competition. If he wants to win, he will have to try very hard. There is little time left until the end of the hunt, and even if he returns to the hunting grounds right now, it will not be so easy to make up for lost time. And looking at this knight, who looks at her with all his might, begging her to agree to his request, he is not at all interested in the competition. Then Adele decided to make a deal of sorts. If he won, she would accompany him to the obelisks. He took the promise that Lady Vita would give herself to him for one day. In the camp, the men grumbled about what family this knight was from, and were clearly depressed. She pretended that the tea party had just come to an end. Both her brother and father said that it was time for everyone to return together, and the girl became gloomy at this prospect. Adele wanted to burst into tears. What a day this is! The brother glanced sideways and asked his father who this knight in black armor was. He was such a wonderful hunter. Having heard about her already familiar knight, the girl swallowed, but the Duke, to her great surprise, said that the most faithful thing would be to stay away from this knight so as not to bring trouble upon herself. In a resigned tone, she muttered that perhaps she too should be wary of him. The Duke glanced at her, trying to understand what she was talking about, and then a nasty grin appeared on his face, which he accompanied with the words that, on the contrary, it would be useful for her to get to know him. The girl wondered what the Duke meant. The next day, the tournament host loudly announced that it was time to announce the winner. He shouted that this was the man who had caught a record amount of prey. The girls thought they were going to go deaf. This year, he is also a knight in black. A silent scream escaped Adele. This is the same Hexen they wanted to marry her to. The Duchess then said that for someone like her, this is a wonderful match. The very one who will become her husband in 3 years. Already now, there is a murmur in the crowd that this knight is cursed. But the people fell silent when he looked in their direction. Adele stood as if petrified, while the knight, meanwhile, walked towards her under the gaze of the frozen spectators. Everyone became quiet, each looking at this mysterious knight with fear and curiosity. Our heroine realized that she needed to get out quickly and tried to squeeze through to the exit, but she had not managed to take even a couple of steps when she heard him address her as "my lady." Now understanding for sure that he was coming towards her, kneeling before her, he said that it was time to put aside formalities. The only thing that saddened him was that she had forgotten about their agreement. Having handed her the trophy golden cup, the knight said loudly that he had fulfilled his promise. Adele stood and looked at him with wide eyes. Covered in more and more sweat, she forced out a crooked smile and words of gratitude, still marveling at the bizarre figure of the prize gift, and wondering why he was giving the gift to her. Meanwhile, the host shouted out that it was time to end the ceremony with the winner's speech, and the knight said that it was time for him to go. Saying goodbye to his lady until we meet again, he went away, leaving Adele with the prize trophy. In an instant, Aaliyah was nearby, all fluttering from this picture. She rattled off that Lady Vita must be incredibly happy to receive the trophy from Duke Militrio, because everyone was simply taken aback by the fact that he chose her as his lady. Of course, she wanted to find out what Adele thought about the Grand Duke's illness that everyone was talking about, and whether the rumors about it bothered her. The first gossip's face became like a fish that was out of air when our heroine recalled how she had praised her knight, to whom she had given the brush, and for some reason was so confident of his victory. Adele found it so funny that she added that, of course, they didn't see the much-vaunted winner on stage, but a black knight. When Aaliyah came to her senses a little, she showered Adele with accusations that she dared to mock her, and in general that she allowed herself to do such things, accusing her of behaving arrogantly only because the Grand Duke gave her a trophy. Aaliyah was wailing loudly on purpose to attract attention. It was necessary to take measures, and the girl approached and leaned towards Aaliyah. She whispered in her ear what kind of drug they were delivering to her from abroad, and it really was that effective. As expected, Aaliyah was hit by a second wave of shock mixed with horror. Adele learned shortly before her death that Lady Alia had been secretly purchasing opium from overseas. Just a year later, her growing addiction would drive the Marquis into bankruptcy. She felt genuinely sorry for him as a father, so she advised Lady Alia to stop before it was too late. Aaliyah froze like a statue. Adele explained about the words, hinting that she understood everything. Adele saw how she shrank from shame and anger and waited for her answer. Instead of answering, she nodded and hurried away. It was a little shameful that she had brought Aaliyah to such a state, but Adele believed that it was for the good of Aaliyah and her father. In any case, she hoped that there would be no more conflicts with her. At this time, a speech from the winner was heard from the podium, who stated that for him, it was a mere trifle. Everyone, including Adele, clearly didn't get the speech they were expecting. The poor presenter hurried to escort the winner from the stands, nervously saying that he must have just been overtired. Adele came down and wanted only one thing: to rest. She was very tired that day. The events were very different from those in her past life, but that doesn't mean she expected them to repeat themselves. But who would have thought that she would meet her future husband? The Duke did not take his eyes off her, asking when she managed to fall into the favor of the Grand Duke. Our heroine became uneasy that the Duke was looking at her so suspiciously, and, as calmly as possible, explained that she had given him a brush and said a few words. Usually, the Duke was only concerned with the reputation of their house, so it is unclear where such interest came from. The Grand Duke of Malatrio is a man surrounded by rumors and gossip. He does not expose his skin even in the middle of summer, and also does not take off his gloves in order to hide his illness. Adele's fate was changing too quickly, and it frightened her. At this time, the Grand Duke Malatrio arrived to the Duke. Adele felt a flush of heat. The Duke glanced coldly at her and gave the order to bring the guest. Our heroine did not understand what brought him here, and the Duke asked the same question. Then, Adele's eyes bulged and her jaw dropped. Out of fear and nerves, she blurted out who he was, but the words flew out faster than she could think them through. It was obvious that he was the Grand Duke. The young man with brown eyes smiled cheerfully and joked that he was really so unrecognizable and that my lady was breaking his heart. The girl blushed, but the knight's manners had not changed at all, but she was struck by his appearance. It was not at all how she imagined him. To say that he was good-looking is to say nothing. Members of the Witt family were not deprived of beauty, but this man was on a completely different level. But for some reason, the rumors then ran counter to his real appearance. They called him the devil himself and gossiped about the huge scar on his face. However, the Grand Duke also gave a reason. Wearing a cloak and gloves in winter and summer, such things were worn only if they wanted to hide their skin. Feeling how it trembled, the girl urged herself to calm down. She smiled. Now it was Milatrio's turn to be surprised, and after that, he simply invited her for a walk, to which Adele was taken aback, not understanding how he could just invite her to go for a walk, and asked again if he meant right now. The Duke stood with his eyes narrowed. He didn't like it, but he didn't think there was a hidden message in his guest's actions. Adele accepted his invitation, placing her hand in his, realizing that everything was only getting more complicated. The Duke said that he would be grateful if Duke Milatrio returned his daughter to him before dark. Otherwise, rumors would spread. The young knight smiled and replied that it was impossible. They were just taking a short walk and talking, and he also asked the Duke not to pester him with his wishes in the future. And they went. What just happened was unthinkable. To say something like the Duke, never before had she heard anyone talk to her father like that. While they were walking into the forest, Adele shared all this with him, The guy laughed and innocently admitted that he didn't like her father at all. There was truth in his words, and Adele understood it. It was just that he said it so bluntly. Along the way, he asked if the lady was at least interested in him now, but the girl did not support his ardor. This didn't bother him at all. At some point, he said that he didn't like that she called him Your Highness, and asked to just call him Hexion. This made her blush so much. Adele did not understand how a person could be so beautiful and irritating at the same time, and try to say as calmly as possible as the Duke wished. He continued to joke and reminded her that she would keep her promise, and she replied that she always keeps her promises. His first appearance in society caused a great stir. A young man of unknown origin was granted the title of Duke. Rumors about the mysterious Duke spread throughout the empire, and some even said that he was the son of the emperor himself or his nephew. At the same time, with each of his appearances, he hid behind armor, especially his hands, which he never exposed. This was overgrown with rumors of a curse. Then she, the false Duchess Vita, was sold to him as a slave. Nobility was intoxicated. He owned large northern lands. However, there were those who were against the union of these two families. Adele analyzed that Duke Vita was the only one who wanted her death, remembering those knights who killed her. Hexion frightened her with his laughing eyes. He was wondering what she was thinking about. Having said that nothing like that happened, she received a comment from her companion that his lady was a skilled liar. Our heroine muttered that the same could be said about him. The knight was curious. She was so willful. So why was she behaving so timidly in front of her father, hinting that she had clearly sinned against him in some way? This made her angry. She wanted to furiously attack him. What right did he have to dig into the affairs of another family and even ask about such things? Their eyes met. He seemed to be trying to read her thoughts. This man's laugh was so loud, his face became innocent when he swore that he couldn't read minds. Then he said that they would meet as soon as they decided on the date. At first, Adele replied that the date was not important to her, but then she came to her senses and added that next week would be good. And all because Karan was returning that week. If she scheduled a meeting with the Duke for that day, then perhaps she and Karan would not intersect, and Hexion did not care what the lady wanted. The young people agreed to meet early in the morning. She should bring all the materials for deciphering, and the Duke, with shining eyes, said that it would be great to have a picnic. Adele was taken aback when he said that she should prepare snacks for him personally, and he would do it for her. He was not embarrassed that neither she nor he knew how to cook. His enthusiasm told the Duke that it was worth trying, and then we would see. Besides, he suggested that it could serve them well in the future, and in general, it's fun to try something new. Still, Adele concluded that he was strange, preferring to drink tea. He said that he wanted to feed her so much. Our heroine was surprised. Did he really want to cook the food himself? In the end, Hexion made her promise that she would eat all of his dishes, even if they were tasteless. She had to promise, but in the end, Adele decided that it wasn't fatal. By the way, he reminded that he allowed her to call him by his first name and asked her to honor him with this. The girl thought it was so absurd, but said that he could call her whatever he wanted. He knew her name. She doubted that he wanted to know her real name, and now it sounded like an empty phrase. The guy said thoughtfully that, yes, he knew her name, but did she know why he wanted to hear it from her lips? Since Adele began to live as Karen Witta, the very mention of her true name lost all meaning. But for some reason, it was so hard to be called Karen, because then the Adele that she still keeps in her heart would disappear. And even though there is not a single person who calls her Adele, she keeps in her heart that orphan Adele who lived in the dark alleys. Nervously rubbing her temple, she remembered that in childhood, Karan also asked her name, but then she still considered herself an orphan. Seeing her nervousness, Hexion exhaled and said that he understood everything. And with a smile, he promised to see me next week, or maybe even earlier. These words made Adele ask again. He waved his hand so that she wouldn't worry about it, and gallantly thanked her for agreeing to his selfish proposal. When Adele left, he said goodbye until the evening banquet. The girl felt as if she had been bewitched. After all, this guy had a special charm, and Hexion thought about this girl. Thanks to her gift, he was able to get rid of the pain. Moreover, the intervals between attacks increased, and he managed to last a whole day without medication. With her, he felt alive, but at the same time, there was a feeling of loss, as if they had met before, a long time ago. The knight shuddered in confusion, and the attack began again. The whole body began to tremble, as if in a fever. He squeezed her gifted hand with all his strength, saying Karen's name. Adele was preparing for a banquet that she had completely forgotten about. The Duke ordered everyone to leave and asked Adele what they had talked about with the Duke while they were walking. Our heroine tensed up, trying to answer as casually as possible that they had simply discussed the upcoming meeting. He asked what kind of meeting this was. The girl did not understand what was going on with him. Usually, he didn't care about anything except her role, and Adele said that he shouldn't worry. It was generally awkward to burden him with such insignificant things. From the cold grin and the Duke's words that if the meeting was so insignificant, then what made her blush? Adele blushed and began to sweat. His eyes were like ice floes piercing her. He demanded to know what he and the Grand Duke had talked about. The girl shook with rage at the words, that if Hexion allowed himself to speak to him so insolently, then it was not just talk. Despite his threats that he would not repeat it twice, the girl calmly repeated that she had nothing more to tell. Even though Adele turned away, she was scared. She felt the malice with which he was looking at her. She remembered Hexion's words about how he didn't like her father at all. She realized that the Grand Duke despised her so-called father and tried to avoid him. And since she and Hexion are now on the same side, perhaps it's time for her to become bolder. And no matter how scared she was, the girl said as harshly as possible that she was trying her best to fulfill the role assigned to her, but she was not obliged to report on her every step. The Duke, after remaining silent for a while, replied that since she had the chance to meet the Grand Duke, she decided to be cheeky to her father. Here, Adele was afraid that she had gone too far. Meanwhile, the Duke declared that since she dared to speak to him like that, it was time to teach her a lesson. What would have happened next if Paris hadn't come in and said that everyone was looking for the Duke in the banquet hall is unknown. But Adele sat frozen. The girl exhaled. How timely the banquet had begun. The Duke, leaving, menacingly muttered that the banquet was about to begin, warning her not to be late. Karen remained sitting there without turning around. It was very stuffy, but there was no time to waste. We had to go to the banquet. Otherwise, trouble was certain to happen, and yet she thought that maybe she would have time to take another walk when she heard some rustling. The girl began to look around feverishly. She managed to catch a glimpse of a black shadow flashing by. Adele shouted to the one who ran past. A few seconds later, strangers in robes began to emerge from behind the tents. The girl rushed about, not understanding who all these people were. The faces of these people were not visible. They did not talk but whispered among themselves and were tall. Adele went cold. Could these people really have come for her? She quickly remembered that everyone should be in the banquet hall. She needed to hurry, but these people surrounded her, not letting her leave. Our heroine, shaking with fear, told herself that they were still far away and would not attack directly at the camp. The image of when she was killed appeared before my eyes. The ground was slipping from under my feet. My head was pounding. Was she really destined to die again? But if they all attacked together, someone would definitely notice. And so the girl decided that they would not act that way. In an instant, she started running as fast as she could. Luckily for her, they didn't block the passage into the forest. The girl ran as fast as she could. The sun was already setting. If she could reach the forest, there were many places where she could hide. And even though there is a high chance of meeting the beast, she will be able to set it on these people. Adele kept telling herself that she could handle it, because she knew this forest like the back of her hand, and she would no longer be a silent victim. People in black robes were heading after her. The sun had already set, one of them complained, thinking that the girl would be scared, but it turned out that still waters run deep. They discussed what to do next, whether to continue pursuing the girl or not, and in the end, they decided to leave. There was no point in wandering around at night. Adele only now began to breathe. It seemed to her that she would simply suffocate. Her heart was almost jumping out of her chest. It didn't look like she was being followed, but her outfit was all wrinkled. Her hair was disheveled, and she even managed to lose her shawl. The girl froze when she heard some rustling. Besides this, there was some kind of glow. Adele walked towards this light, making her way through the tree branches, and discovered that the glow was coming from the obelisk. It was incredible. For some time, our heroine stood motionless, mesmerized by this unusual phenomenon. All the symbols on the stone acquired bizarre outlines and glowed. Coming closer, Adele at first thought that it was some kind of luminous paint. But no, the paint shines much brighter, and the letters became much more visible. What surprised her was that the first line had changed, as could text carved in stone change. The girl could not take her eyes off this phenomenon, finding it simply amazing. The idea to translate now came to her mind, and she began to read something written about the night. Stepping into the forest of Fulleheim late at night, after this line, someone tapped her on the shoulder for the umpteenth time. She barked without turning around that she was busy. completely in ecstasy from what she saw on the obelisk. When it dawned on her that she was apparently not alone here, she turned around and screamed with a face distorted with horror, wondering who was there. Duke Hexion, standing and smiling as always, waved to her. To her next question about what he was doing here late at night, the knight replied that he had followed her, seeing how she was making her way late into the forest. Only now did Hexion notice that the girl was shaking, and her outfit did not match the weather of the forest night. He gallantly put his cloak on the girl, asking that he didn't know that they would meet like this before the scheduled hour, but why she didn't warn him that she would go into the forest. When he said that this made him sad, the girl commented that many things made him sad. Hexion chuckled and admitted it was his weakness that showed up when she was around. While they were apologizing to each other, Adele noticed that the man was not moving his left hand. I remembered the rumors that whoever saw the Grand Duke's left hand would meet a sad end, and since no one had seen it, the rumors continued to grow. They also said that his hand was injured in an accident. Adele didn't notice how intently she was staring at his hand until he asked if she found his left hand interesting. Seeing her confusion, Hexion told her what he knew about the rumors. He was very curious by nature, and since it was she and no one else, he put his left hand on her hand. Adele gasped at the sensation. His hand was harder than stone. It was hard to believe that this hand belonged to a human. The guy naively assumed that it was a curse and asked, looking at Adele, if she was afraid of him. The girl gently removed his hand and honestly answered that she was not sure about it. And the knight admitted that he felt alive next to her. Our heroine blushed at this confession. Then he laughingly called it nonsense and asked her not to worry about it, asking if she had already translated the inscriptions on the stone. Before she could get angry that he was again avoiding the answer, she said that she hadn't finished yet. The inscriptions began to differ from those they had seen during the day. They started talking about the translation and the radiance. Hexion asked permission to look at the translation, and she invited him to sit on a stone. The man sat down on the stone gratefully. Adele began to look with her eyes for the lines where she stopped. Hexion kept his eyes on her, wondering why he felt so comfortable around her. He behaves differently with her than with others. He himself allowed her to touch his hand. If it had been anyone else, he would have already cut off his hands. When she touched the glove, his numb fingers felt warmth. He believed that it was somehow connected with the dreams he had begun to see the day before, and the ever-growing feeling of déjà vu. What secrets did this girl hide? Suddenly, Adele burst into loud laughter. Hexion reminded her that he also wanted to know what made her laugh so much. He joked, Adele said cheerfully. Did she really sadden him again? Unable to contain his smile, Hexion jokingly admitted that he was now sadder than ever. They exchanged a few more jokes, and the girl said that she would read it for him. The man wrote that whoever is reading this now must have entered the forest at night, but he warns that Fulheim is much more dangerous at night than during the day, and these writings appeared at night thanks to magic dust. When fairies bask in the moonlight, a mysterious substance accumulates in their bodies. With the exception of a safe zone at the entrance to the forest, the rest of the forest is their domain at night. It is the moonlight that opens the way for the fairies and awakens the master of the forest. Young people commented that the author constantly mentions the owner of the forest and that the atmosphere here has changed. That is why he decided to write the message in such a way that it could only be seen at night. Everything could have ended badly if the story became known to the world, and if someone finds out about everything, their life will be in danger, and by abusing this knowledge, everything can be turned upside down. Adele also spoke about a line in the middle that was difficult to read due to damage. The Duke admitted that the whole story was strange and that it worried him. They stood at the obelisk for some time. Suddenly, Hexion raised his left hand, asking if she liked translating the inscriptions, to which Adele looked at him in horror. The man noticed that, according to his observations, she was enjoying the process. He looked at her attentively, as if studying her. Adele blushed and asked what was wrong. Hexion replied that when she smiles, she truly becomes beautiful. The girl shuddered and looked at him menacingly. Our heroine argued that it was inappropriate to express herself in this way, but the Grand Duke did not understand why and did not see the problem. Afterwards, they stood in awkward silence. Then Hexion laughed. Adele constantly lost control around him, and it drove her crazy. Therefore, he remembered the banquet, which should have already come to an end. All Adele's sadness about the lost shawl was reflected on her face. Hexion guessed that she wouldn't be patted on the head for her absence from the banquet, and, extending his hand, suggested that they return together, using it as an excuse for missing the event. The girl thought sadly that it seemed she was destined to remain in his debt forever. As they were returning back, Hexion reminded them that next week they would go looking for the second obelisk. He shared his curiosity about whether the second one would also burn at night, and expressed the idea of staying in the forest overnight, accompanied by trusted people. Adele's eyes sparkled, and she asked if it was possible, although the Duke thought that she would refuse. Our heroine silently replied to herself that in order not to see Karan, she would be ready to go to the ends of the earth, dreaming that Hexion would take her as an escort for a month. She expressed doubts about her father, but Hexion convinced her not to waste her energy talking to him. He would take care of that himself. Another weight was lifted from her shoulders. She had no desire to ask the Duke for anything and wanted to return to the camp as soon as possible to prepare everything for the campaign. At least that's what she planned. Bella rushed to her call as fast as she could. The maid apologized and muttered that she wanted to wake her up, but the Grand Duke Milavito told her not to do this and to wait until she woke up. Adele jumped up and widened her eyes, which meant that the Grand Duke had been waiting for her for over an hour. While the maid was remembering Adele's childhood and how she couldn't be woken up, our heroine jumped up like a soldier and ordered her to be collected as soon as possible. In her head, she went through the options for why he had arrived today if they had only met in the forest yesterday, and they had planned to go for the obelisk next week. Although she remembered his smile and the hint that perhaps they would meet earlier, she expected everything, but not that the meeting would be so early. Although she understood that she was in his debt, and of course, there was a question why he came today when she was in such a state. Whatever will be, but it was necessary to go out and greet the guest. As the girl descended, she heard the servants talking about the Duke's curse, and their fear that it would fall on them too. The servants were clearly nervous and frightened. Even Adele heard rumors about the lady. They said something about her childhood and the man who worked here. While the girls were trying to explain themselves, Adele turned around and called Bella. She gave her the order to find the butler and punish the maids for their long tongues. The maids begged Bella to intercede for them and have mercy. Adele no longer intended to waste her energy on them. She had another goal. She approached Hexion and apologized for the long wait. He was polite and cheerful as always. Suddenly, his expression changed when he saw her in the daylight, her face and how thin she had become. The Duke asked if she was getting enough sleep, and the girl nodded, keeping silent about the fact that she still had nightmares. Adele felt embarrassed for the servants, and she carefully asked if they had disturbed him. The guy laughed, calling it a trifle. He was used to it. Our heroine almost burst out laughing. Such things clearly shouldn't have been said with such a beaming smile. Although someone like him can regret anything he said, he simply closes his eyes to all the gossip. No matter what rumors surround him, he still remains a great duke. He has the authority and power that the emperor himself bestowed upon him. No matter how much Adele needed his help, she did not want to get closer to him. She decided that their relationship would end next week. She no longer wanted to be tied to this role, and she asked Hexion why he had come such a long way here. Our heroine literally froze when she heard his proposal to marry him. At first, however, Hexion was as serious as ever and looked at her expectantly. The girl said that he had stunned her with his proposal and called it an inappropriate joke for early in the morning. He carefully extended his hand to her face and said that she was being mistreated. The girl, nervous, screamed what he was even talking about. Our heroine turned away from him in an offended manner, declaring that she had had enough of his groundless insults. Hexion asked her if she didn't tremble at the mere mention of Duke Vita. He remembered that she asked to postpone their meeting for a week, so she herself was aware of how her shoulders were shaking. He also remembered the bruise on her neck during their first meeting, and how she tried to hide it with makeup. The way the Duke looks at her, and the way the Duchess looks at her. He became even more convinced of this when he arrived here. Even what he told the Duke about that day was not enough to justify her absence from the banquet. Adele, she didn't know what to say, feeling bitterness and shame. Hexion asked her, as his lady, not to lie in their defense, almost losing consciousness from his words, when he took her hand in his and promised to protect her, and he will fulfill everything she wishes. The Grand Duke stood before her and swore an oath to protect her from that moment until his death. Adele asked in a muffled voice why he was doing this. What was the benefit to him? But his only answer was the desire to stay by her side. Adele doubted whether she would be safe with him, because even at the banquet, danger awaited them. But he became the only person who extended a helping hand, and the girl wanted him to remain a savior in her memories. If she marries him as Karen Witta, the burden of this name will be with her until the end. But the girl did not want to be a burden to him, which she told him politely as she bowed out. He listened in surprise to her refusal and gratitude for caring for her, after which she asked to return to her estate. She stood huddled and motionless because Hexion was in no hurry to leave. The knight knelt before her, calling her his lady. His voice was filled with warmth and affection. He said softly that he did not expect an answer from her right now. She certainly would not be a burden. Adele could no longer hold back her tears. The young man admitted that he only spoke about the feelings that overwhelmed him. Apparently, that's why he started rushing things. But now it's time for him to go to the estate, wishing her a speedy recovery, and our heroine tensely wished him a good journey. They were supposed to meet next week, but as always, Hexen, smiling mysteriously, answered at the end that he thought they would meet earlier. Adele wanted to ask again what he meant, but she didn't have time. The knight's words did not seem strange to her. The very next morning, to her greatest amazement, Hexion was in their castle. He was beaming with happiness, saying that he had been waiting for her and asking her to sit down. The girl didn't even ask how long he waited for her this time, and it turns out that since he was waiting for her and didn't touch his plate, they were forced to wait for him all this time. He moved to sit next to her to make it more comfortable, and Adele didn't object at all. Hexion laughed and chatted, not paying attention to the atmosphere around him. Adele did not believe that he did not notice them. Everyone was on edge. They never missed a meal. Moreover, they never waited for her as long as she could remember living in this family. Still cheerful, Hexion suggested they begin their meal. While Adele still couldn't believe that she had witnessed such an event, he whispered to her that he had really tried hard. The knight's face shone and expressed such genuine warmth. Adele couldn't help but burst out laughing. The already angry Duchess irritably asked what business had brought the Duke to them at such an early hour. He ignored her question, saying how delicious the food was, and looked at Adele's plate. Hexion handed her a piece from his plate, but the girl, smiling tensely, said that what was on her plate was enough for her. He said simply that they say food tastes better when you share it, while the Duchess was barely able to contain her rage. And only now he pretended that it seemed to him as if the Duchess had asked some question. The Duchess, all twisted with indignation, reminded him that she had only asked a question politely, expecting a polite answer as expected by ethics. The Duke turned his face to her, making it clear that she should control herself. Smiling cheerfully, Hexion replied that only he decides with whom to be polite and with whom not. At this point, the Duchess's nerves couldn't take it anymore, and she screamed out that he was allowing himself to do this. And Hexen, ignoring her exclamation, said that yesterday he met with a young lady and proposed to her, but she refused him. He said this as if he was talking about the weather, and with a beaming face, he wanted to try his luck again. Adele didn't know where to look, and the Duke, with some fear, clarified what it meant that Karen had already received an offer. Adele firmly and categorically stated that she refused. Hexion nodded that he understood everything. What was done could not be undone. The Duchess could barely sit at the table, gritting her teeth from nausea, headache, and the surging irritation. Of course, now was not the best time to have a quiet breakfast. Looking at her plate, the girl wondered if she had ever had such delicious food on her plate before, and even though another scandal awaited her after the Grand Duke's departure, right now she wanted to eat. The knight seemed to understand what was driving her and asked her not to rush. Adele wished this moment would never end, but it was time to say goodbye. Our heroine expressed that he shouldn't come here for breakfast anymore and put on a show. He became sad for a moment, seriously considering her words. After her words, he left the estate with a sad expression on his face. Adele followed his carriage with her eyes, realizing how unenviable her situation was. Before she could take a breath, an alarmed Bella appeared and announced that Madame wanted to see Karen immediately. Adele trudged towards the Duchess's office and stopped in front of the door. Having knocked, the girl called her mother, although she knew that she hated it when Adele called her that, but now there were a lot of prying eyes. The Duchess raged and raged, ordering all the servants to get out and barking at Adele to come over and stop standing there like a statue. The girl approached, barely moving her legs, after which she raised her hand and hit Adele with all her might, causing her to stagger. In anger, she called Adele a rootless creature who dared to humiliate her. She screamed that since the Grand Duke favored her, she had completely lost all fear. A torrent of abuse flew at Adele, the Duchess calling her a pathetic nobody who hoped to change her status by marrying such a monster as the Duke. Previously, she made a lot of efforts to win her stepmother's love, and at first, the Duchess treated her with warmth. And then her attitude towards Adele changed with a snap of her fingers. The woman must have found out that Adele was her husband's illegitimate daughter, an illegitimate daughter who appeared in her house. Adele was expecting a new blow from the Duchess, maddened with rage, accusing the girl of being a creature who did not appreciate gratitude. The Duchess's eyes stared at Adele with a fury that also flashed with surprise at such a rebuff from someone who had silently endured everything. Our heroine tried hard to get through to her stepmother, asking who was to blame for this madness. She, who was adopted to become a puppet, or the madam, who found out something she shouldn't have known. The girl gave a speech in which she called both herself and the Duchess victims, and since she cannot take out her anger on the true culprit, she takes it out on Adele. It seemed that madness was raging in the Duchess's eyes, and her consciousness refused to accept the words of this girl. But still, biting her lip, the woman removed her hand and turned away. Adele understood how terrible this woman's life was, and even in the future, her rage would not subside. She even felt sorry for the Duchess and silently said that she was leaving. Her stepmother, quietly and calmly trying to imitate anger that was no longer there, called Adele a bad girl and asked her not to stay up late, emphasizing that this did not mean that she liked her. Coming out of her room, she saw a familiar smiling face. Adele, in fact, was no longer surprised. Didn't she talk about breakfast? But Hexion didn't let her finish, arguing that since she didn't give him the opportunity to be present during breakfast, he decided to visit at least during lunch. The girl thought nervously that he had decided to come here every day, but the Duke and Duchess clearly didn't like it. The next day, Hexion showed up in the evening, and the next day, he also came with a bouquet of flowers. The next day was also illuminated by his presence. So Hexion came for 60 days in a row, and Adele already perceived him as a member of the family. At one meal, he reminded her of her promise. While Adele was trying to figure out what kind of promise it was if they saw each other every day, the Duchess, nervous, thinner, and in a bad mood as always, was taking medicine for her stomach. The knight playfully declared that a promise is a promise, and casually asked if she would like to marry him today. Patiently exhaling, the girl reminded him of the refusal, but this did not bother her gentleman at all. Adele saw that his presence and behavior were becoming habitual, and she wondered if this was normal at all. Our heroine looked at the Duchess, who had changed a lot during the time that the Grand Duke had been here. The woman looked simply terrible, being subjected to Hexion's endless attacks. She believed that the Grand Duke began to behave so aggressively towards her stepmother after he saw the marks on Adele's face. Lost in thought, she shuddered at the voice of the guy who addressed her. Pointing to her cheek, he noticed that the piece of rosy bun that had recently stuck to her face had disappeared. The Duchess shuddered and looked at her plate, from where the rosy bun had disappeared. It turns out that he quietly snatched the plate from under the Duchess's nose and placed it in front of Adele, and lectured the Duchess about the harm it would do to her stomach. Trembling with hatred, she could hardly restrain herself from attacking Hexion, who was pretending to be casual. Adele sat crimson, while Hexen sang a laudatory ode to the baker. The Duke slapped himself in the face in frustration. Hexion pierced him with his gaze, and asked if he didn't agree. Adele watched quietly as the Duke was seething with rage, but did not dare to answer. But still, this whole situation was to Adele's liking. The day of the appointed meeting with Hexion arrived. Adele came down early in the morning. Karan was supposed to return in the morning, but she didn't want to cross paths with him. She had had another nightmare last night, and was still haunted by an unpleasant feeling. The girl didn't have to wait long. Her knight had already arrived. Our heroine's mouth dropped open in surprise. Firstly, he arrived early, and secondly, his whole face was red. For the first time, the man admitted that he was going for a walk with someone. He was worried that he would be late, but here he is. Adele took his hands and said that they were so cold. How long had he been waiting for her? He said that they agreed to meet in the morning, but did not specify the time. The girl's eyes widened, not believing that he had come here at 5 in the morning, and now it was already 7:30 in the morning. Hexion admitted that he was as nervous as a child and could not sleep. Adele suggested warming up first before going anywhere. Like a child with shining eyes, the guy clarified with him. Adele nodded. Her plans were to go to a restaurant and have breakfast. Then the guy happily announced that he had brought food with him. Only when he pointed to the standing horse did the girl see what a huge box was tied to it. To her stupefaction, he simply explained that he didn't know what food she preferred, and therefore he took everything. She was shocked not only by the fact that all this food was intended for the two of them, but also by the fact that he had not slept at all. Seeing his face, she added to herself that she was not praising him at all, so stop glowing with pride. Just as she was about to suggest they take a rest, since he was tired, Hexion asked his lady to go into the forest and they would eat there. The girl was worried that he was very cold, although the knight brushed it off, saying that this was normal for him. Having said that he was indeed fine, Hexion glanced sideways at the light rustling. People in black robes were watching them. The young people set off on their journey, and upon arrival, Hexion, as always, carefully helped Adele get off her horse. He asked if her guards would follow them. The girl asked again in bewilderment about the guard. She had arrived alone. The Grand Duke realized that these were not Adele's father's people, and Adele herself looked around. She found herself in the forest again, but to get here, she had to travel a long way. What's even more surprising is that they got here faster than by carriage. Hexian took out the basket and asked if his lady would mind having breakfast first. Adele smiled. He must really be looking forward to showing off his culinary skills. She was really hungry and didn't mind the knight's offer to have a snack at all. The basket was really huge, and it looked like the Duke had put everything he could into it. Therefore, the girl thanked her companion. Hexian himself carefully emptied everything from the basket. He asked if this would be enough until tomorrow morning. Adele glanced around. This would be enough for a month, not to mention until the next morning. But she still couldn't help but notice how neatly the sandwiches were cut. He had prepared them superbly. Still, Adele clarified whether it was he who said that he would prepare a variety of food. The guy proudly replied that she was absolutely right. There were a variety of sandwiches here, with ham, meat, a variety of vegetables, even with eggs and jam. They also had bread, fruits, and fruit wine. After all, the Grand Duke had gone so far as to prepare all of this with his own hands. She should be grateful. After chewing a piece, the girl exhaled how delicious it was. This was the best compliment for Hexian, who asked to eat more. Everything was more delicious than she could have imagined. Because of the problems with his left hand, it was obviously difficult for him to cook all this. Meanwhile, Hexian asked to treat herself to fruit wine. Those puppy eyes of his seemed to be begging for praise, and it was already tiring her a little. There was a feeling of annoyance that she could not show even a bit of such feelings. Taking the glass, she asked if this was really Rudolph's fruit wine. The young man smiled. He was pleased and surprised that she knew about this. This wine had been aged for 5 years, since there was little rainfall that year and the apples were unusually sweet. Our heroine began to taste the wine. If this wine was indeed made at that time, then it is the same wine that won the Golden Drop Award that year for its amazing taste. They started talking about wine. Adele knew that even not every high-ranking nobleman had such an easy time getting it. But Hexian, out of modesty, said that he grabbed the first thing that was in his cellar. He said that when it comes to capital, they are obliged to take risks and put it into circulation in order to increase it. But if we talk about wine, its taste and value only increase with age, and when it becomes extremely rare, there can be no talk of price. The girl called him a financial manipulator because of whom one bottle cost 5,000. Therefore, he expressed his opinion that the status of power is useful. This applies to both the Grand Duke and the ladies of the ducal house. The topic of this status, giving the opportunity to spend money well and for one's own pleasure, moved on to Hexian, asking Adele whether she considers her relatives a worthy family. The girl responded by asking what he wanted to hear from her. The knight was worried that she was not appreciated enough. Therefore, he stated that if they do not respect her, then she has the right to respond to them in the same coin. And if one day her situation begins to weigh on her, his house is always open to her. He said so touchingly that he would always wait for her response to his marriage proposal. This touched Adele's heartstrings, but at the same time, the tension grew as he continued to raise the topic. After which, the knight asked if she was going to start deciphering. The girl was impatient to begin. She had already spent a lot of time resting. The young man stood up and declared that while she was deciphering, he would clean everything up here. As she walked away, Adele looked back at him. One question was bothering her, so, plucking up her courage, she asked why he never called her by her name. His response was a smile, and the words that she never gave her name. He amazed her more and more with his insight, and our heroine began deciphering the second obelisk, which, unlike the first, was in good condition. The girl was so immersed in deciphering that she didn't notice the knight watching her. He noted Hexian was dying of curiosity, so Adele read to him that the first obelisk was only an introduction. The author of this obelisk wrote that since the one who got here deciphered this part, he definitely intended to set out on the journey. The Forest of Fulheim is also called the Abode of Gifts, and to this day, there are corners in it unknown to man. When he asked what was next, the girl said seriously that she couldn't do everything at once, that she needed to concentrate. Hexian admired her. She really was an amazing person. The man, looking at Adele with fascination, began to say that she was definitely for him. The girl finished his sentence for him, saying that he liked her, and the Grand Duke reacted with eyes full of horror and a scream. And the young knight screamed because his lady disappeared in literally a split second. Hexian was able to find her tracks near the obelisk, but they ended, no matter how much Adele looked for her, she was nowhere to be found. There were still her fingerprints on the obelisk, and, strangely, Hexian could still feel her presence. He was sure that she had been here just recently. The girl's trace disappeared exactly where he last saw her, and before she disappeared, The Duke did not feel any traces of teleportation magic. My head was torn apart by thoughts of what could have happened. At this time, Adele stood and looked at Hexion, who was pale, anxious, and nervous, and could not understand anything. She smiled and said that she was standing right in front of him. Why swear like that? Our heroine didn't understand why he was behaving so strangely. Did he really not see her, or was he simply ignoring her? While Hexion was wandering around the clearing, she timidly tried to attract attention to the fact that she was standing there. Finally, the girl thought that this joke had already gone far enough, and seriously and loudly called on the knight to stop. She reached out to touch him, and felt herself being hit with energy. It was then that she finally realized that something was clearly wrong. Her hand recoiled and could not touch Hexion. I decided to try again. The same thing happened as last time. Whenever she wanted to touch him, her hand was pulled back, as if by some kind of energy barrier. And after her, there were still traces left on the grass, which means it's possible that this is connected to the obelisk. Our heroine began to flip through the notebook to understand where she finished translating. The author called the part of the forest where the obelisk was located a forest of hallucinations, or a forest of visions. Firstly, it cannot be forgotten because its very existence defies any explanation. Adele froze, trying to understand why this forest was called the Forest of Visions. The girl held her notebook with trembling hands and read about hallucinations. They are what is mentioned on the obelisk. It should say here how to dispel them. It was necessary to decipher the obelisk faster. Adele was afraid that Hexion would believe that she was not here and leave this place. But even if he continues to look for her, it is dangerous here when night falls. Remembering that terrible wolf, she realized that visions do not affect everyone here. Shaking with fear, she realized that the animals apparently were not susceptible to this magic. Her hands were shaking, she had no concentration, and she could not find an answer. She translated incorrectly, but how can one understand where exactly she made a mistake? The girl sighed. What difficult letters these are! Trying to control her breathing and calm down, Adele told herself that there was still time. Hexion was still here. If she could decipher it, she would definitely find the answer. A line was missing where it was written about the place of visions that the author mentioned. The girl finished the part that she missed in the translation because it turns people into unknown creatures. And again, she was thrown into a fever. Unknown creatures. But what if she herself is no longer human? Now it was clear why she could no longer touch Hexion. Fear paralyzed her again, and if she would never be the same again, the fear was dispelled by a deafening scream right next to her ear. It was Hexion yelling where his lady was, calling Adele. He was so close, but he didn't see that she was standing right next to him. The knight himself, as he had expected, had disappeared somewhere, and he was trying to figure out what he had missed. His thoughts took him to stories about this forest. People said that people often disappear here, and therefore entry is prohibited during competitions. Since there were other places available for hunting, he never thought about entering here. Hexion considered stories about missing people to be stupid rumors, and he had also read something similar. There was one document that describes a case where a man returned a year after suddenly disappearing, who said that he saw the heavens, so there was no need for food, clothing, there were no wars, civil strife, but this man was alone there. Once someone gets there, he will be left alone, which means that being in the same place as others, the latter cannot contact you. He felt lightness throughout his body. The last time this happened was when she stood next to him. Hexion felt how the pain in his heart and the left side of his body noticeably weakened, and the knight said out loud, addressing Adele, that he would stand still. Hexion didn't believe in the reasons, and he wasn't given the opportunity to know them. All he could do was hope. The guy spoke to Adele, asking if she could hear him. While Adele tried to shout to him, Hexion calmly said that the high probability of this phenomenon was inscribed on the obelisk. Addressing the girl, the knight expressed confidence that she also understood this, and therefore it was only necessary to decipher what was inscribed on the obelisk. He promised that while she was deciphering, he would wait here for her. There was still time. Without her signal, he would not move from this place. Time passed. Hexion sat on a stump, bent over from the fatigue of waiting. He was so sure that she was here, but admitting to himself, the man understood that he simply had no choice to think differently. Adele stood and listened to him without the opportunity to change anything. She was also tormented by doubts about whether she would be able to decipher the obelisk and get out of this mess. Hexion, like her, tried to calm himself down and get into a positive mood, but hours passed, and he was tormented by doubts about what to do. If she didn't give a signal by the end of the day, then was it worth looking for someone who could decipher the runes? But then, many would find out about this obelisk. From this helplessness, his head was splitting, and the man cursed. Suddenly, he jumped up as his body began to tremble. It was as if my breath had been caught, and a noticeable pain began in my chest. Hexian was tormented by guilt and anger at himself. He shouldn't have let go of her hand. The knight was tormented by worries about his lady. Adele, hearing him, appreciated the pompous speech he delivered, but she understood that he was having a very hard time and was afraid. It was strange because, for some reason, the girl felt lighter. She was translating a text that said that the impossible becomes possible. The author wrote that the Forest of Visions is a special place where all fantasies and desires are destined to come true. He assured that they will be like a breath of fresh air for a tired traveler, but one should not forget one fact. The author reported that he had been exploring this place for a long time. Adele froze with a look of amazement on her face. It turns out that the answer to this riddle can be found on this obelisk. Again and again, our heroine urged herself to calm down. Even though much of what she had written had been lost due to the destruction of the obelisk, and it looked like it would take much longer than she had expected. The girl tensed up and heard someone's cry in her ear that a person had been carried into the interworld. Adele's gaze fell upon a strange creature hovering in the air. She flew around Adele, who had grown cold from the old man, with curiosity. Adele tried to squeeze out a word, but her tongue wouldn't obey, and the creature hissed angrily, accusing the girl of wanting to call her a beetle. The hovering creature pounced on Adele, screeching so loudly that the girl thought she would lose her hearing. It screamed that it had just seen her and was immediately rude. Although Adele was scared, she noted that this little thing was so small but so fierce. The creature's body radiated light. It looked like a fairy tale creature, and she blurted out, addressing the creature, "Is she really a fairy?" She arrogantly folded her arms across her chest and squeaked, "That's what the little people call them." Adele was amazed that fairies exist, and one of them was flying in front of her. She asked a second question, which meant the fairy could see her too, and the fairy herself doubted the adequacy of the person standing in front of her because of the stupid questions. She looked at Adele, calling her strange, and in turn asked if she was sure she was human. The fairy looked at the obelisk and stated that it seemed to protect her, asking if Adele had been in this forest before. Our heroine replied that of course she had looked, but the fairy clarified about the thicket of the forest itself. Adele admitted that she had never been in the thicket itself, and the fairy stated that it was very strange. Our heroine froze at the words of this creature, which means that she came to decipher the obelisk, so young, and can already decipher the writings of Haxenlight. The name of the hero Haxenlight, a man who accomplished many feats for the sake of his people, began to spin in my head. One of the legends even says that he defeated a demon. It turns out that the person who carved the letters on this obelisk was Haxenlight himself. Adele was delighted with such an amazing person who left such a magnificent legacy, but her words did not give the fairy anything. She knew nothing about human tales, but she remembered that when this man came here, he said that he did not need any rewards for his actions. Suddenly, the fairy pointed at Hexian and asked Adele if he was Adele's companion. The girl blushed, remembering Hexian. The fairy noticed this and began to praise the knight. What a wonderful guy he was. Didn't Adele want to return to him? Hearing the word return, Adele cried out with hope, asking if the fairy knew how to do this. The new acquaintance peeked out shyly from behind the obelisk and offered Adele a deal. If she moved the obelisk, she would tell her how to get out. Our heroine was satisfied with this. Adele, the creature, spoke about this man, at the end, dreamily adding, obviously with love for Haxenlight, that this is how they met him. The girl noticed that the fairy clearly missed him, but then she pulled herself together, asking what she was thinking about. It was interesting with the fairy, of course, but she needed to translate quickly. Several hours passed. The fairy already began to yawn. She came to her senses when Adele, tired but happy, announced that she had finally translated everything. The creature began to circle around, asking to read, but Adele suggested an easier way, to simply show the notes so that she could read them herself. She folded her arms at her sides and muttered that she didn't know the human language, reminding him that the girl herself hadn't been speaking a human language all this time. And how could anyone understand her scribbles anyway? Adele was shocked by this news. All this time here in the interworld, she spoke the language of fairies. It turns out that here, she is not a person. Then she said in confusion that it would take a long time to read, looking at the tired and dejected Hexian. But the fairy indignantly teased Adele that she had spent all her strength on translating the text. Then she offered a new deal. If Adele read the translation notes, She would make sure that this guy, pointing to the Duke, would be crazy about Adele. The fairy believed that this was exactly what Adele wanted, and our heroine blushed upon hearing this. She awkwardly asked again why all this, but the fairy clarified that she didn't like this boy. But after a couple of seconds, she winked slyly and added that if you don't like this one, you can make any other one go crazy. It was incredible, but this little one could control the minds of other people, and to offer such a thing to Adele was a generous act of generosity. Trying to answer as politely as possible, the girl explained that she didn't think she needed that. The fairy looked confused and muttered that she thought she would definitely like it, repeating once again that Adele was strange, however. Still, the fairy couldn't calm down, asking what Adele wanted. Our heroine was very tired, but she understood that this creature wouldn't just leave her alone, but she couldn't offend her, so she offered to read. The fairy simply beamed with happiness at this proposal, but Adele made her promise that she wouldn't be angry no matter what she said. The fairy was very surprised by this condition, asking why she would be angry. Keeping calm, Adele answered silently that there were many reasons to be angry, but said out loud that the decryption contained information for people. We decided that the fairy wouldn't be angry. Adele said that she would read it as quickly as possible. The only thought in her head was to give a signal to Hexion before dark. The reading of the translation began with the entry that the interworld is a place connecting the world of people and the world of fairies. This is the true kingdom of the fairies, but sometimes people invaded their domain. However, only those who feel their mana are capable of this. So far, the fairy agreed with everything written, and also with the fact that Haxenlight has studied this place well. People who at least once crossed the threshold of the fairy realm were called boundary crossers. However, many people at first simply thought that they had lost their way. Haxenlight himself wrote that he himself had lost his way many times. The man described fairies as cruel and treacherous creatures, devoid of moral principles. But this does not mean that you cannot interact with them. Sometimes they like to charm people, but among them, there are those who enjoy human suffering. For them, it's nothing more than an empty joke. This place will seem like paradise to anyone who gets there. The main thing is to find the right path. The fairy exploded from such a description of her kind, calling Haxenlight a complete scoundrel. Even if he had already kicked the bucket, she squealed. Well, who is the scoundrel here? She circled and screamed that even now she couldn't give him a punch. Adele was silent, realizing that the creature had lost its temper. But the girl continued reading the translation. The author wrote that the journey would never know obstacles. Anyone who entered would always be able to find their way back from the fairy kingdom. To do this, it was only necessary to touch another person. But Adele did not understand how, since she was precisely the one who could not touch the Duke. But there was a note that it might still happen if it is not possible to touch the person. Adele froze when she saw the baskets and food on the blanket. When she was silent, the fairy asked if Adele had finished reading yet. The girl came to her senses and shouted that there was still a little bit left. The author also gave advice that if a person decided to go to the kingdom of fairies, he needed to find a flower and eat it. However, Haxenlight warned that before going into the inner world, one must check that there is nothing from the human world. But if one manages to leave the world of fairies, the person who has been in the interworld will still be able to see fairies. And if you manage to make friends with a fairy, she will help you return back. Fairies live in this world forever, but this does not mean that they cannot die. The author admitted that he lied to them when he promised that he would stay with them forever. Therefore, listening to these words, the fairy became sad. Our heroine concluded that she was quite close to Haxenlight, but that's not all. He wrote that various paths can lead a person into the interworld. It could be a search for fairies, or a desire to find all the obelisks, but whatever the desire, you must definitely make friends with the fairies. The girl fell silent. The coordinates of the third obelisk were still indicated there, but the last mark worried Adele, namely, that when night falls, you can meet a creature with scarlet eyes. Here it was said to close her eyes. Adele certainly stated that she needed to remember this. The fairy asked all this impatiently, and Adele confirmed that this was all she had managed to decipher the obelisk. The fairy's small hand pointed at Adele, and the creature declared that in gratitude for the text, she would give Adele a gift. The girl didn't have time to ask what the gift was. The fairy had already blown some magic dust on her. Shimmering particles surrounded the girl, penetrating her entire body. She began to rub her eyes, not understanding what it was. The fairy said that now Adele is under the protection of the obelisk. It will be useful for her. When the girl asked again what she meant, the pleased fairy replied that Adele now had the power of healing, but warned her not to use it on others. Our heroine looked at the fairy in surprise, not understanding what all this meant. She did not feel any changes in herself. She glanced sideways at the sandwich that was worth trying to eat. She managed to touch it and lift it. After taking a bite, she saw Hexian looking straight at her and screaming. She chewed silently, already accustomed to being invisible to him. Suddenly, she saw that the glow surrounding her body had disappeared. The knight watched her appearance with fascination. In an impulse, he reached out his hand to touch her, to check that she was not a hallucination. Their hands touched. Saying that his lady was here, the man tightly squeezed the girl's hand, afraid that she would disappear again. He shouted that he was so glad that she was okay. Hexian talked and talked, spilling out emotions about how he was worried that he had lost her forever. But since the pain in his heart subsided, she was here. He admitted that he didn't even take medication. He didn't want to lose hope, because he believed that his pain would show her the way. Adele listened to him, not believing that they were talking like this. In a fit of emotion, the girl placed her hand on him to make sure that what was happening was real, embarrassing Hexian. She stumbled awkwardly and fell into his arms. The girl felt how tired and exhausted she was during the day, and also this existence of fairies. But the truth about them was truly frightening. Rubbing her eyes, Adele was glad how good it was that she would not be able to see this fairy again. But her joy was short-lived. A familiar voice squeaked that she was back, alive and well. The girl's jaw dropped. She saw her recent acquaintance. The fairy exclaimed with joy. What happiness that Adele could see her again! The little creature grinned and reminded her of her gift, the blessing of the fairies. It was all because of him. Adele was completely confused. If she returned to her world, then why was she still seeing fairies? But that was not all. She was able to see other things, for example, the writing on the obelisk, which could only be seen under the moonlight. Our heroine staggered and asked again about the blessing, and about the fact that now she would always be able to see fairies. Giggling with joy, the fairy confirmed that it was not only fairies, but other creatures as well. From now, with his listening to this, Adele became more and more horrified, and the fairy, seeing her face, asked if she was not happy. She didn't want to see what others couldn't see, but at that moment, Hexian called her, alarmed that his lady was pale as a sheet and talking to someone. The girl wondered if she would tell him if he would believe her. On the other hand, the fairy squealed, asking what was wrong with her. Wasn't she happy with such a gift? Then, a strong gust of wind came out of nowhere. The fairy lost control of herself, saying that she didn't even remember being so kind to anyone. The wind almost knocked her off her feet. The girl covered her face with her hands and wondered if this was all the work of a fairy. Hexian saw nothing around him and did not understand where this gust of wind came from, but he knew that his lady was in danger. He ran up to the girl and tried to grab her hand. After, Adele gasped as she heard the blow that Hexian took. Having come to her senses, the fairy herself did not understand how she had lost her temper, and contemptuously said that people were so ungrateful. Adele asked the knight if he was okay. He said the girl froze when she saw her. His hand was indeed made of stone. The fairy grimaced in disgust, asking where this terrible smell was coming from, whether it was from a person. Hexian frantically hid his hand under his clothes. The pale young man apologized to Adele for making her see something terrible. The girl remained silent. She was truly impressed. The fairy inserted something that resembled a side effect of Bale's poison. Adele turned to her and asked again what kind of poison it was. The fairy noted that it was so long ago, and our heroine hopefully asked if she could heal Hexian. Nervously, she asked again. She can, right? Finally, the fairy answered, to heal this stone hand, and then reminded that Adele herself received the gift of healing. And the more obelisks she transfers, the stronger her ability will be. The girl, shocked by such news, asked again if she had gained special power, and the fairy said that, in any case, that's what Hansenlight called it. Ancient artifacts can have amazing power. Hexian, embarrassed, hid his stone hand and thanked her for telling him, and Adele kept thinking about the glow that had recently surrounded her, and whether it was somehow connected with the obelisk. The girl nervously thanked the fairy for such a gift, but this was too much. The fairy blossomed with gratitude, until Adele squeezed out a request to take this gift back. The fairy again became gloomy and angry. She could not take back the gift, since it merged with Adele's body, and in general she noticed that the girl was not particularly happy. Adele herself summed up that now she would see such things for the rest of her life. The creature arrogantly folded her arms and emphasized that, by the way, the gift was very useful. For example, Adele could walk at night without any problems, even see fairies. Isn't that amazing? When our heroine almost burst into tears, what should she do now? She screamed, "What a strange man this is! And why should she explain everything? Then the girl asked how she could use the obelisk's blessing. Haxenlight wrote that this was the key to making wishes come true. And the fairy knew nothing more, but she was sure that if Adele deciphered the rest of the obelisks, she would find out how, because Haxenlight always said that he would leave this place only after he wrote all his knowledge on the obelisks, and she expressed the opinion that Adele must already know about this, after which she flapped her wings and flew away. Adele called her again. There was a lot to find out, but she wished her luck and disappeared. Hexion asked who she had just spoken to. She admitted that she was with the fairy lady, asking how he ended up there. Of course, the Duke didn't see anything, and he was surprised that the gust of wind was created by a fairy. But Adele, smiling nervously, said that the fairy had already flown away. The girl approached Hexion without taking her eyes off his hand. He felt heavy and awkward, but he only muttered that it wasn't contagious. Then our heroine asked permission to look at his hand. He asked if she wasn't disgusted by the urging not to hide her true feelings. Carefully placing her hand on his, Adele calmly said that she understood how anxious he was. She felt the same. Raising her eyes to him, she asked him once again to show her hand. Taking his stone hand, the girl felt the color and texture of the stone. Then she asked him if it hurt. Without looking at her, the man answered dully that everything was fine. After Adele realized that he had finally opened up to her, she really wanted to help him. If at that moment the fairy asked for a wish, she could have made a wish to heal his hand. Taking his stone hand in hers, the girl wanted with all her heart to heal him. If only she had such power. At that moment, a glow began to emanate from her hands and move to the knight's stone hand. Hexion stared at the phenomenon without blinking. Adele herself stared in shock at what was happening. For a moment, the stone retreated, and she saw his normal hand. But this lasted for a split second, after which the hand became stone again. Even though it was all for a moment, Hexion was able to feel his fingers. The sensitivity had returned. Even now, while taking the medicine, he could barely move his hand, and the tips of his fingers were numb like a corpse. He could feel them. Alarmed, Hexion asked Adele what just happened. The girl conveyed the fairy's words that she had gained superpowers. Thanks to her ability to heal, she believes she can help him. The knight exclaimed, "Even if she lives for this, is it really all because of his illness, Scarlet?" The girl, reeling in horror, asked again about the name of the disease, and the guy explained that that was what it was called. After all, it was from this disease that the real Karen Witta died. Adele found it hard to breathe, and asked him to repeat why he was in this situation. Hexion wanted to tell her the truth, but was it only because they had similar fates? But he didn't want her to see him as a monster. If this girl helps him, he will finally be able to gain freedom, freeing himself from the Emperor's grip, and he decided to tell her the story, warning that it would take a long time, and began to tell her what she already knew about the Vita family, which is a devoted supporter of the Emperor. While the Emperor needed the Duke's support, their alliance was planned for years to come, and it seemed the alliance was unbreakable. But 10 years ago, an incident occurred that forced Duke Witt to kneel before the Emperor. He asked the Emperor to find a doctor who would heal his daughter from a fatal illness. The girl was overcome with fever. 10 years ago, she herself found herself in the clutches of the Duke. Hexion watched with alarm as Adele's face changed. There was no point in hiding it anymore, and our heroine quietly said, "He apparently already knows who she is since he told this story." The knight admitted that he had known about her existence for a long time, and he also knew about the true nature of his illness. The man then asked Adele if she knew about their long-standing relationship. The girl asked again, and he explained about the political marriage. A heavy silence fell. Adele didn't think that the conversation would turn to this topic. Meanwhile, in order to connect two puppets together, Adele almost lost consciousness 10 years ago. This means that she was abandoned because of the birth of her younger sister, and their marriage was not arranged anyhow. Everything was predetermined 10 years ago. Then another question immediately arose. Why was she killed? Because they found a more successful replacement. The girl was shaking, as if in a fever. She didn't know anything at all, naively believing that she just needed to run away before her younger sister was born, and that there is only one step left to gain complete freedom. But it turns out that from the very beginning, this was an unrealizable dream. She did not even understand that she had long ago become a toy. Hexion watched Adele with regret. Afterwards, he quietly added that he himself only wanted to receive the Emperor's love. That is why he swore eternal loyalty to him, and when he agreed to drink the poison, he showed his true face. So the man sadly added that they would go down the same path. That's why she can cry in front of him without holding back. No matter how bad the girl felt, she clenched her teeth and decided that she would no longer cry because of her family. nor because of the situation she found herself in. So the knight opened his mouth in surprise when he heard that she was okay. She looked at him with a determined gaze, smiled, and replied that she would shed her tears only when she found her own happiness. This girl never ceased to amaze him, and Hexion said with pride that he thought his lady was truly beautiful. Adele looked down in embarrassment. The Duke understood that she was still stronger than him. Inside him there was an impulse. Could he really reveal his secret to her? And he asked if she knew who he was. Our heroine blinked and replied that he was a Grand Duke, a descendant of the imperial family, but the man revealed that he was actually the result of an affair between the emperor and a gypsy woman, an illegitimate child who had been forgotten by everyone and abandoned by his own father. Her heart fluttered. It turned out that both she and he shared the same fate, and in order to stay alive, Hexion had to beg the emperor on his knees for mercy. According to the Duke, this lasted until yesterday. Now he wants to change the course of the game. He offered her to help him and work together. The knight explained that thanks to her power, she would be able to save him, and he would no longer have to grovel before the emperor. Every 6 hours he had to take the medicine given by the emperor, otherwise it became difficult to breathe. Taking her hand, he said that he had not needed medication for the last 12 hours. He no longer feels pain, and all because his lady is next to him. The girl jumped back in shame. She didn't do anything. What does he mean? She was just there. He smiled charmingly and found it wonderful. Remembering her words about the fairy who gave her power, he knows nothing about it, but believes that his lady can save him. Hexion himself promised to help her in turn, because in the future, it might happen that the emperor would order her to be killed. The knight anxiously shared that this was possible, since for the last few years his majesty had doubted the strength of Duke Wit. After all, when the emperor got rid of her, he would have a chance to frame Duke Wit. Only in this way will he be able to finally subjugate the Duke's family. Hexion didn't know the full details of the plan, but the outcome could already be predicted. Our heroine was horrified and angry. It turns out the Duke is not the only one who wants her dead, and the emperor is a treacherous man who doesn't trust anyone. The knight sadly added that for him, the lives of other people were nothing more than toys. There was a pause as the young people stood, trying to collect their thoughts. Hexion took her hand and admitted that he would very much like to know her name. Adele didn't know what to say or why now. He was always curious, and besides, he shared his secret, and if he began to call her by her real name to the Duke and the emperor, wouldn't it become doubly difficult? Still, the girl did not understand whether knowing her name was really such a big deal. He assured that there was not a drop of lie in his words. Everything he said came from his heart, and the Duke promised that it would continue this way. Adele was grateful to him for such words, and yet her heart was still uneasy. Hexion simply offered her to use it to take revenge on her enemies, because from now on, they could rely on each other. Bitterness pierced his heart. The girl quietly muttered that this was why he proposed to her. But Hexion began to explain that it was not only that. She made him feel alive again. Remembering their first meeting, he admitted that it felt like he met a dear person after a long separation. Even when she is next to him, he worries if everything is okay with her. That's why he visited her every day and still felt uneasy in his heart. The knight, as if in support of his intentions, squeezed her hand tightly. In addition, the man admitted that he was unhappy. When she is not with him, the Duke spoke touchingly and sincerely. Adele stood there confused. He, as before, said that he missed her, but even though he knows about her now, this doesn't mean that you should believe everything he says. In that future, when she dies, it was he who agreed to the political marriage proposed by the emperor, and if he hadn't done this, she wouldn't have been killed on the way to the residence. She didn't understand anything at that time, but did he know about the impending tragedy? But his eyes looking at her now said that he didn't know. However, is it possible that Hexiona changed because they met earlier than then? Our heroine was in doubt whether her powers or his feelings were to blame, or perhaps she influenced fate. A hope was born in her heart that maybe her future would change too. The man's face changed when the girl said that her name was Adele, after which his face filled with tenderness, and he repeated her name. Then the girl asked how she could be useful to him in the future. She would not mind signing a contract. Hexion became serious again and asked her to marry him until they get rid of their enemies, or until the time comes when it becomes unbearable for her and she does not want to leave. He promised to protect her and give her freedom. Imagine the knight's surprise when Adele agreed. She agreed to marry and promised to trust him. In a fit of rage, Hexion hugged her so tightly that our heroine gasped in surprise. He pressed her even tighter, and Adele felt pain. When she made a sound of nervous confusion, he let her go. Turning away his embarrassed face, The guy said that he was so happy. Adele herself blushed, but she didn't understand why he was so happy. Hexian changed the subject by asking about the obelisk, whether she would wait until dark. But the girl replied that it was not so important for her, because now she could read hidden messages even during the day. The knight clarified that this was what she had discussed with the lady fairy, and Adele nodded, telling about her gift given by the fairy. In that, they approached the obelisk. Adele began translating, and Hexian sat down on a stump. But after that, she noticed that he fell asleep. This was understandable. The day had been tiring. When Adele finished, it was completely dark, and Hexian was sleeping. The girl looked at the sleeping knight, who was completely exhausted. Adele also decided to sit down for a couple of minutes. Without realizing it, she was looking at Hexian. Black hair, dark eyes, and black clothes. If you think about it, he is the only one who could become her husband. It was interesting then, during the attack, he came to the rescue. Perhaps he was too late. That terrible moment consumed the girl. There were sounds that she heard before her death. Did he really send someone to help her? Our heroine was so immersed in her memories that she only woke up from his words that she would burn a hole in him in just a little while. He admitted that he is a very light sleeper. Adele said that she had finished deciphering and that they might not return here anymore. After all, their strength was running out. Surprised, he asked if she wasn't disgusted to live in Duke Vita's house. But Adele said that she had no choice. The man simply suggested that she run away. That's what he does sometimes. And the emperor does not try to stop him, because he knows that he will return for medicine. The girl dreamily said that she would like the same. With fire in his eyes, he said in all seriousness, "Why shouldn't she try?" The guy winked. Now she has such an opportunity, and she won't find a more reliable place than his estate. Adele blushed and wanted to object, but Hexian had already promised to protect her no matter what. It was easy with Hexian, but will their union be the right decision? It was time to go back, and, putting her hand in his, the girl mentally said that she wanted to believe him. He was the only one who stood up for her in the dark forest. The girl held a blue velvet bag of money, saying that this should be enough. He said that he needed information. Hexian explained that while he was in the emperor's power, he was very limited in his actions. Therefore, he needed a reliable spy to monitor the actions of the imperial family. And Adele had such a person in mind. Even though she said so, I really hope that she wasn't lying. She walked through the crowd with smiles, trying to remember the place. In one of the gateways, she saw a drunken beggar. Dirty children sat on the steps. Nothing had changed since she had been here. The girl pulled up her hood. 10 years had already passed, and she really hoped that the informant was still here. Suddenly, she saw a boy who was staring at her sullenly. It seemed he had been following her from the beginning of the journey. Apparently, he understands other people much better than others. Adele thought that perhaps he was the leader of the gang of local orphans. To his surprise, Adele called out to him, saying she had a couple of questions. The boy began to pull his cap over his face, trying to hide it, and muttered that if she was looking for an exit, it was on the other side. The girl smiled and said that this was not a place where one could accidentally wander. With the air of an adult, the child replied that she didn't think she had any friends here. Adele said that she was looking for someone. Does he by any chance know a guy named Jean? Pressing himself against the wall, the boy replied that he didn't know anyone with that name. Taking out a bag of money, the girl remembered that this guy had a unique eye color. Once you see him, you will remember him forever. Taking the coin, she put it in the boy's hand, saying, "Jin has bright red eyes." The child couldn't take his eyes off the coin with admiration, not yet being completely sure that it was real. And our heroine continued to say that she is Jin's friend. She has business with him. Will no one help her find him? Making it clear that nothing would work out, the boy stated that he definitely could not allow them to meet. The girl begged him to tell Jean that Adele wanted to meet him. Noticing that the boy was looking at the bag, the girl handed him more coins and asked when she could meet her friend. The boy was in complete shock that there were so many coins. Having tried it with his teeth, he added with admiration that the gold was real. Then looking at this boy, Adele remembered herself as a child when she received a gold coin, and it seemed that the whole world was at her feet. She wondered if he was acting this way because he was looking after other children. Having thrown the bag to the frightened boy, our heroine declared that she could keep all the coins for herself. The boy said that even if she gave everything, she would not be able to see Jin today, and carefully asked why she was giving so much gold. The girl called it a bribe, and the boy, leaving, warned that if Jin didn't answer, he wouldn't come back here. The next day, Adele walked to the same place. This alley was like a labyrinth, and no one could get there without a reason. She hid her face as best she could. Yesterday she was lucky and survived, but today she might not have such luck. She was glad that Karan had not yet returned, but she felt that they would definitely meet today, so she needed to hurry back and get ready. Her young guide was already waiting. Adele greeted him and asked what the outcome was. The boy leaned over the railing and said that Jin had said that he had never had any friends. He looked at the girl, also not believing that she could have anything in common with someone like Jin. Then it dawned on the girl that this person wasn't the one who looked after the stray cats, and the girl shouted out Jin's name loudly. A tall man appeared in front of her, touching Adele's face. He said that he thought she had been dead for a long time. Bright red eyes looked at Adele, and the man exhaled, which meant she was still alive. The boy's eyes widened as it turned out that this lady and Jin were really friends. Adele looked at Jin, who had grown very tall and rather intimidating. But it was him. Jin also looked closely at his childhood friend. Finally, he resolutely took me by the hand and said that we needed to go somewhere else, explaining that it was too dangerous here and they needed to find a more suitable place. The girl almost fell and asked Jin not to go so fast. She couldn't keep up with him. To her relief, he slowed his pace and released his grip on her wrist. Looking forward, I clarified it better now. Smiling, she replied that yes, he was still worried about her. They walked up the stairs. It was quite dark, and the man warned her to step carefully. Considering that they had been walking for about 15 minutes, Adele realized that there was a secret underground passage here. Thanks to the fairy's blessing, she could see perfectly in the dark, but if she got lost here, trouble would be inevitable. Jin seemed to read her thoughts, took her hand, and asked her not to let go of his hand. Suddenly, a bright light blinded my eyes. They found themselves in a busy square. The girl was surprised that this was not the center of the capital of the empire. She didn't understand how they got here. When they approached the building, Jin told her to follow him. While they were walking, the girl saw a meeting. Apparently, it was an information guild, a place that is not so easy to get into. Just as she was about to voice this, the guy asked her to remain silent until they got up. Adele assumed that they would come to some kind of dungeon. Jin opened the door to the office, where the guy greeted him with a bow. The owner resolutely walked forward, announced briefly that he had returned with a guest, and ordered tea to be made. The girl simply froze in place because of where they came from and how her childhood friend behaved. When he asked her to sit down, our heroine almost jumped on the spot. She couldn't come to her senses. She imagined everything differently. Suddenly, Jin handed her something soft. Without asking, he began to wrap her up, despite Adele's indignation. He justified this by saying that she was cold, although Adele insisted that she was not at all, and that it was sunny outside. Jin replied seriously that there was no problem with that. Adele was really hot. She asked to cover just her shoulders, and that would be enough for her. The man took note of this and did as she asked. Jin fussed to make Adele comfortable. Finally, the girl touched on the topic of his situation, noting that his status had risen since their last meeting. But Jin indifferently stated that, not really. It was just that the routine had become more, and it was boring. Looking at his expression, Adele realized that she still couldn't understand what he was thinking. The guy hadn't changed much. However, if he was given such an office in the Information Guild, then he clearly occupies a high place. The girl smiled and replied that she was alive, although a lot had indeed happened to her. Was Jin really looking for her when she disappeared? So she asked him to answer why he decided that she was dead. The guy replied that Cal and Jack told him this. They told about someone drowning, and when they went there to investigate, a crowd of onlookers gathered. Returning a little later, the guard told them that the bodies had already been disposed of. But then, they brought Jin a leather bracelet found on the body that he had once given to Adele. That's why he had no choice but to believe them. Jin watched tensely as Adele bent over from this news. He asked what was the matter. Was there something he didn't know? Adele was silent, looking forward and comprehending the information. Jin was waiting for an answer. It turns out he was lied to. The girl straightened up, but remained silent. Folding his arms across his chest, the guy replied that everything was clear. Then he asked to tell what really happened. Gathering her strength, the girl began to quietly tell that Kel and Jack had sold her. They had committed a terrible sin, and then they had also lied to Jin. Adele was frightened by Jin's voice cursing Kel and Jack. The guy's face was distorted with devilish rage. At this time, there was a knock on the door, announcing that the snacks were ready and waiting outside the door. Jin barked at him to leave and get out. The boy obeyed and left the tea and sweets. Jin's scarlet eyes pierced Adele as he tried to control the anger that was overwhelming him and asked her to tell him everything in order. He clarified whether she was sure that those damn bastards had sold her. Adele remembered herself at that moment, small and scared. They were there at the moment when she was taken away. Then they hung around her all the time. The girl, she will never forget how they gagged her and how they laughed when she was kidnapped. Adele wanted to know if they were still alive. Jin grabbed his head upon realizing what he had heard. Then he hoarsely replied that, unfortunately, they had recently died. She wanted to know how exactly. The guy reluctantly said that obviously someone wanted to get even with them. Their mutilated bodies were found. He stood up and said that there was some tea here, but he needed to go and sort out some things. The girl became nervous and asked what happened. Jin explained that he had forgotten something and now it needed to be fixed. He also asked her not to go anywhere, as he would be back soon. Adele took a cup of tea, thinking that she could wait a little. After all, she had business with him. She thought that Jin had forgotten her long ago, but her thoughts were interrupted by Jin, who had already returned. He returned quite quickly and noticed that her plates were empty, and he gave the order to bring her more snacks. Adele tried to make it clear that she was already full. The girl shuddered when a man in a black robe covering his face answered above her ear. He appeared out of nowhere. And if Jin now works with such people, then what kind of person has he become over the past 10 years? But even in her youth, he never ceased to amaze her. His voice interrupted her memories. He wanted to know her story, how she survived all this time. The girl replied that there was nothing special to tell. If she told about their relationship with the Duke, she would break the agreement. Adele urged herself to restrain herself and squeezed out that everything was fine with her now. But Jean said that judging by her eyes and the way she said it, you wouldn't say so. Nervously, she remembered that she would have to leave before sunset. At her word to leave, he exclaimed, his eyes wide open. But where to? Looking away and shivering, Adele replied that she was going home. Where else? The man slammed his fist on the table, angrily declaring that they had just met, but then asked what business she had with him. Adele explained that she needed the help of his guild. She wanted to hire a professional, but now believes there is no need. The girl openly shared that the task was very dangerous, and Jin clarified to what extent. Adele warned that his life would be in danger, to which Jin replied that they were constantly in danger, but our heroine said that this task would be tantamount to treason. Jin's face reflected horror, surprise, and fear at the same time. He didn't understand why she needed all this. He tried to stop her before it was too late, but Adele firmly said that she had already made her decision, and besides, she would have an ally on her side. Jin picked the girl, gently covered his fist with her hand, and replied in a gentle voice that she had made this decision herself. After all, this is the only way she can break the chains that have bound her fate, by saying out loud that she wants to become the mistress of her own life. Jin looked at her as if a creature from another planet was sitting in front of him, and not the girl he knew. After some time, he sighed heavily and agreed to meet with her and her ally. Adele beamed with happiness. He offered to walk her home, but Adele said she remembered the way back. The girl gave him a fur scarf, saying that she was very glad to meet him again. Jin said in all seriousness that she could come here whenever she wanted, and that it would be her home too. At first, in a fit of rage, he said that if only he had known that she was alive, it was clear from his voice that a storm was raging inside him. The girl wanted to ask again what he meant, but the guy looked away. Then he said in simple words, if she wants to run away or just relax, this is always her home. Our heroine smiled. It was like déjà vu. She thanked her childhood friend with all her sincerity. She was so happy to see him again. Jin looked down and nodded. He was also very glad to see her. They went out to a crowded place, and Adele said goodbye. Without taking his eyes off her, Jin gave the order to follow Adele to make sure she arrived safe and sound. The most important thing is that they don't get caught while being followed. In addition, Jin ordered to find out what Adele had been doing for all these 10 years, but most importantly, that neither the imperial family nor Adele found out about it. The servant in the black robe asked what to do with those they had locked in the basement. Jin wanted to check these things himself, giving the order not to let anyone in until he left there. Adele returned home and carefully made her way to her room, trying to walk as quietly as possible. Apparently, no one was looking for her. The only thing that would await her at dinner was a meeting with Hexion. She slipped past the servants, confident that everyone was in the dining room and that Karan had obviously already returned. The girl leaned against the door in fear, wishing that this dinner would never end. It looked like a bag of overripe fruit. Her first thought was who put it in her room, but then it dawned on her and she began to breathe heavily. Judging by the shape and the smell of blood, there was no mistake. It was this bastard. To keep from screaming, the girl brought her hands to her mouth. Karan brought this bag again. In her past life, she naively looked inside. He longed to hear her scream in horror. Did he really imagine that it would really hurt her? She touched the bag with disgust. It was very heavy, and she could hardly move it. Opening the door, she put the bag out into the corridor. The door slammed shut, and Adele almost screamed throughout the room. Having closed the door behind her, the girl began to breathe tiredly to calm down. Her plan was to prepare food at dawn and then wait for Karan to leave the estate. Karan will stay here for 2 weeks, and until then, she must contact Hexion. Since they can't ignore Hexion, she will take advantage of this and buy time. Seeing that her window was not locked, she decided to immediately close it with the help of her magic. Karan is able to not only control flames, but also move objects. Approaching the window, she saw bright white dots in the blue sky. Adele stood as if spellbound and did not take her eyes off them. She sat down at the table, assessing her ability to see in the dark, because now she cannot turn on the light, otherwise she will be discovered. Since she deciphered the inscriptions on the second obelisk in a hurry, her notes were illegible, so she decided to sit down and rewrite everything. I had just started rewriting when I heard footsteps outside the door and a scream. Holding the pen over the inkwell, the girl realized that it seemed Bella had found her gift. Adele closed her eyes tiredly. Bella screamed frantically for the head butler. Adele, sitting on edge, listened, but at some point, everything went quiet. Then the rude shouts and insults towards Bella began, saying that she was a stupid chicken. Why did she open the bag? And Adele realized that writing would not work. The senior maid appeared, and Karan was shouting in a voice that was not his own that he had ordered this to be put in her room. Apparent threats rained down that if she didn't come out, he would knock down the door. The girl really hoped that he wasn't serious and quickly slipped into bed. He started counting to 3. If he didn't come out, he would knock down the door. Bella started getting hysterical. She begged the young gentleman to stop. He was about to endure it when the Duke grabbed his son's hand and asked why he made such a noise at night. Karan stared at his father. The displeased Duke told his son that he was already an adult, and therefore there was no need to behave like a child, but he insisted that Karen hadn't even come down for dinner, and he just wanted to open the door. Adele hid under the blanket. The Duke knocked and asked to open the door, after which he told Karan that she was already asleep, but Karan did not give up. He did not believe that Karen could sleep after such noise. The Duke could not stand it and started shouting that he had had enough. With one glance, he made it clear that that was the end of it. Turning around, he walked down the corridor, saying that they would still be able to see her tomorrow, and he ordered his son to follow him downstairs, and Karan reluctantly agreed, after which he hissed maliciously at the Duke, asking if he really thought he would just follow him, and used magical power to knock down the door. The Duke screamed, but it was already too late. He was standing in Adele's room and was saying in a sarcastic voice who was not sleeping there. The guy brazenly ordered Adele not to pretend to be asleep and teased her, but maybe she was just avoiding him. Our heroine sat up and pretended to be sleepy, saying that she had just woken up. Karan started to get worked up, mimicking her and immediately stating why she wasn't showing her respect. Then he said that the girl had grown up, remembering how before she would have been hunched over and sobbing on the floor. Roughly placing his hand on her head, he asked how she was doing. The girl abruptly removed his hand, ordering him not to touch her while she was in her chambers. Then he would not do whatever he wanted here. While he was recovering from her rebuff and saying that it was because of that monstrous Duke who proposed to her, his father and servants stood at the entrance and simply remained silent. Adele, without fear in her eyes, calmly looked into his eyes and said that she was tired and told him to leave. Of course, Karan was not going to leave, saying that if he didn't leave, then what would happen? In that case, Adele decided to leave the room herself. The girl ordered Bella to prepare new chambers for her. A frightened Bella stuttered and said that everything would be ready now. Adele shuddered at Karan's voice, which declared that everything was clear. It was just that he had been away from home for so long that she had become unruly. She couldn't move her arms and legs. Karan suddenly extended his hand, calling upon the element of fire. The window was blown out by his force, and the shards scattered throughout the room with a deafening crash. Opening her eyes, she saw fiery threads coming out from the point of interweaving. He enjoyed it all and promised to stop if she begged him for forgiveness. She saw how a ring of fire wrapped around her waist and lifted her up. In the blink of an eye, the girl was thrown up towards the ceiling. Adele was right. Now with her new gift, she saw the essence of Karan's magic. Then the fairy whispered that she would see in the night as if it were day and would be able to defeat the wizard. Yes, our heroine began to understand what the fairy was talking about. Seeing the fiery thread, it turned out that it only needed to be cut. The problem was whether she could grab it, but it was worth a try. Reaching out, she tore it off with her hand and was surprised to find that she was flying down. Karan experienced a real shock, screaming and cursing. He tried to understand why his spell had stopped and what she had just done. Adele, with wide eyes, tried to understand whether it had always been so easy. Karan was getting more and more angry, wondering how this girl could stop his spell. True, she couldn't show the Duke her powers, so that they don't suspect her of anything. She can't trust anyone in this place. So Adele pretended that she herself didn't understand why this happened. Her words calmed the guy down. After, Adele flew up to the ceiling again, calling on herself to stay calm. With a satisfied smile, her tormentor said that it was just an accident. Enjoying his strength and power, he pushed the frightened Adele over the edge of the balcony, demanding her apology. Bella just stood there, deathly pale with her mouth open, and the Duke told Karan what was wrong with him. If she fell, she would break. Suddenly, Karan looked at her with fear. My thoughts were fragmentary. My lungs were filled with water, but my soul was rejoicing. She succeeded. Apparently, she fell into the fountain under the window. Despite her choice, she was glad that she survived. Then she felt herself being dragged. It was Karan who immediately rushed after her, pulling her out of the fountain. He kept saying what a fool she was. Adele tried to catch her breath and get the water out of her lungs. His hand carefully lay on the girl's shoulder. The guy asked if she was okay and immediately recoiled in horror. Adele screamed at him not to touch and looked at him like a beast. At first, he was contorted with anger and wanted to do something to her again. But after a couple of seconds, he opened his eyes and opened his mouth. Adele stood up resolutely. Everything about her was different. There were no tears, no feeling of being hunted. The girl's face was unperturbed. Karan was even asking himself who the hell this girl was. Could this really be the same little crybaby who always walked around with her eyes downcast? Adele, breaking into a scream in Karan's face, said that people like him are the worst in the world. He sat there with an expression as if he couldn't believe his eyes. What Adele had just said didn't fit into his perception. After some time, he laughed. Now Adele had to be surprised. And Karan laughed because this girl was able to show such emotions and say such words. So that's what was hidden behind this quiet appearance. Our heroine indignantly asked what was funny about her words. At this time, Bella was running towards her as fast as she could with a blanket in her hands. Adele, how tired she had been of all this for years. Of all of them, the Duke, Karan, and everyone who served them. She was sick of everything in this estate. Now she heard a painfully familiar, indifferent voice asking if she was hurt. Now he calmly said that he could call a doctor if she was hurt. Adele knew that the only thing he cared about was the pawn he would give away to Hexion in the name of his meaningless promise to the Emperor. In that case, she will also follow the role of informing the Duke that she is going to get married. Hearing about the marriage and about Duke Militrio, Karan exclaimed, "The Duke," as if summing up, clarified that she had nevertheless decided to accept his proposal, and Adele nodded. The man smiled faintly and said that he was very happy about it. Karan, dumbfounded, asked again, "What marriage?" The Duke closed his eyes tiredly and asked them not to make a noise, reminding them that Karan was no longer a child. He told Adele to go into the house. He would inform her once he had discussed the details of her marriage. The girl resolutely replied that there was no need for this. She stated that she would choose the date and time of her wedding. Before that, she followed his orders, but she would do it herself. Karan still couldn't comprehend what this girl was saying and, with wide eyes, asked her to repeat what she had said. The Duke muttered that ever since she had been at the hunting competition, her behavior had been deplorable and was getting worse and worse. Just think that the lady who would become the wife of the Grand Duke was behaving inappropriately. His look did not bode well, and the Duke himself attributed this shortcoming to the fact that he was too busy and failed to instill good manners. Then he ordered the butler standing behind him to bring a cigar. Bella looked sideways at the gentleman with horror while wrapping up the shivering Adele. The maid begged her mistress to beg her master for mercy, but the Duke ordered everyone to leave except Sebastian, Bella, and Adele. Karan almost burst into flames with a cry, but the Duke made it clear that he should leave. He had something to say. Giving everyone time to leave, he beckoned Adele to him with his hand. Karan just wanted to be indignant, but the Duke ordered this circus to be stopped. Then he turned to Adele, pointed his finger at her, and ordered her to come to dinner the next day. Adele didn't answer, but just looked at him silently. The Duke lifted the girl's chin, addressing Karen Whitty in the tone of a father whose daughter had stopped respecting her parent, and who would have to apply punishment. Pressing on her sore spots and enjoying his power, the Duke asked how she was going to get married if there would be scars on her face. What will he say to the Grand Duke who will take her as his wife? Fear flashed in Adele's eyes. He admitted that although he himself does not know why she hates him, He, in turn, hates him immensely, but after stroking her head, he approved of the marriage with the Duke and let her talk nonsense. He is glad that she made this decision. If she keeps her mouth shut for the rest of her worthless life, it will be even better. Bella was given the order to take Adele to her old room, lock her in, and feed her as before, twice a day. Our heroine struggled to escape, shaking with hatred, but the Duke reminded her to stop this useless resistance, because without him, she was nothing. He also spoke about her secret absences, which only happened because he closed his eyes. Lighting a cigarette, he said that there was no such thing as Duke Militrio's monster, and ordered the butler to contact him to discuss the wedding preparations. Adele was full of sadness. She was again in this guest room on the second floor. This room was opened only during her punishments. The girl believed that it had never been cleaned. So before, being in the darkness, she could not see everything. But now she saw every speck of dust, and even though anxiety remained in her soul, it was still better than sitting in pitch darkness. In the past, all she could do was cry in a room where she couldn't even see the tip of her nose, and could barely find her bed without bleeding, and then she greedily devoured the piece of bread that was given to her once every 2 days. So the Duke was right when he said that she hated herself for her own impotence. Why couldn't she follow his instructions? What she should do to earn his forgiveness? It was so bitter that she was such a fool and didn't even blame her tormentor, the man who punished her for no apparent reason. Now she knows the truth, but she still can't get out of here. A feeling of helplessness gnawed at her from within. The servants bowed in greeting to the Duke. He came. Hexion sat in the living room and smiled at the sight of him. The Duke looked with a hateful gaze at the one whom he called an insolent man, but was just a puppet hiding behind his title. The man, a journey with an unknown end awaited them both. Recalling how much had passed since Adele's imprisonment, he told Hexion that his wife had become noticeably happier since his absence, emphasizing that persistence was certainly good. But didn't the Grand Duke think that he had gone too far? In turn, Hexion shared his observation that the Duchess's actions towards his bride were also excessive. These words made the Duke shudder, which gave Hexion pleasure. Then the Duke changed the subject and began talking about plans for marriage. His plans included sending it to His Majesty the Emperor for approval, but he believed that it would be better to first get engaged and then set an official wedding date. With a smile, Hexion decided on this matter that he needed to ask the lady's wish as she wanted it. The Duke said that he would ask his daughter about her wishes and then convey them to the Grand Duke. And again he changed the topic to the wedding date, when Hexion would like to arrange it. To this question, Hexion also replied that he wanted to ask his lady, but the Duke also could not give an answer to what his daughter wanted. He muttered that he would ask his daughter until he met Hexion's direct gaze, which contained mockery. The man noticed that the Grand Duke wanted to tell him something, and the young man thanked him for his attention. The Duke said that he was not good at reading the situation, but if something was bothering Duke Hexion, he should not hesitate to ask. He bluntly remarked that he should discuss all these things with the Duke and not with his fiancée, and he demanded that his bride be brought here immediately. He did not miss the Duke's concern, as he claimed that his daughter was ill and did not want to leave her room. He argued that Hexion wanted to visit her himself, citing his daughter's refusal to be seen in such a state. He shuddered when he heard the knight's laughter. Afterward, the Duke stared at the guest in fear. Then he said that he was crossing all boundaries. Hexion said that the owner of the house was lying outright, and that if he was going to lie, he should better rehearse his emotions. He also expressed an opinion about the Duke's narrow-mindedness. The maid was shaking from the screams in the living room. The guest was sure that the Duke's daughter was not that old. After all, the knight himself has met a great many liars in his life, and therefore he will never confuse this feeling with anything. And in an absolutely cold tone, he ordered that the bride be brought immediately. The Duke had no choice but to follow his daughter. In turn, Hexion asked that if the girl was really sick, then let her not leave her chambers. He would go up to her. He watched as the Duke began to lie again, saying that women in such a state were the last people who wanted guests. Hexion understood perfectly well that they were trying to send him away. The Duke had to apply eyeliner when the knight began to sing an ode to his love. They agreed that the Duke would return soon. Hexion threw back at the owner of the house that he saw how the Duke was taking care of his daughter. He emphasized with a smile that he had interrupted the conversation and gone to fetch his daughter personally instead of sending servants. The Duke did not fail to reply that she was his youngest child, so he cared about her every step. Hexion agreed that once you look at this girl, you won't be able to take your eyes off her. As he climbed into the room where Adele was locked up, the Duke cursed this bastard who didn't know the rules of etiquette. Now he plays an important role for the Emperor. But after their wedding, the terms of the agreement will be fulfilled, which means the emperor will limit the power of this bastard. However, the man was worried about the unbearable behavior of this girl, and therefore, the first thing he was going to do was to return her meek disposition. Approaching the door of the room, he ordered the maid to open it. Adele listened as the lock to her room was opened. The girl saw the Duke in front of her. Our heroine closed her eyes from the bright light coming from the corridor. Seeing her book, he immediately snatched it up, menacingly demanding to know how she had read it, since there wasn't a single source of light here. The girl responded with displeasure that she was simply holding a book in her hands. How could she read anything here? He began to think that this was a reasonable answer. The Duke told her to change her clothes and go downstairs. The Grand Duke had come to see her and wanted to see her. Adele immediately realized that Hexion reads people like an open book, and therefore would immediately realize if something went wrong. The girl understood what she had to do and told her stunned father that she refused to go out. She stated directly that from now on she would not budge from her spot at his command. Bella was on the verge of fainting. She was trembling at the mere sight of her master and could not understand how the mistress could not be afraid of him and talk like that. The Duke became increasingly furious at how his puppet dared to contradict him and reminded her that if she thought that the Grand Duke would protect her, then he was only so on paper. But in reality, he was the same puppet as she was. But this no longer had any effect on Adele. She calmly objected that this was impossible since his submissive puppet no longer existed. The man, with her hands clasped across her chest and her eyes closed, the girl was ready to take the blow, but there was no blow. Instead, a familiar voice said that he thought the Duchess had a bad habit of being violent. Her savior was Hexion, who intercepted the Duke's blow and was now ready to tear him to pieces on the spot. He couldn't, seeing how confused Duke Hexion looked, he confirmed out loud what he thought. Unable to come up with anything better, the Duke replied that he only wanted to teach a lesson, because that's what all parents do when their children are wrong, calling it the duty of any parent. Adele watched the scene with a shy expression. Hexion asked the Duke again if he really thought it was okay to punish like this just because he was a parent. The Black Knight interrupted Adele's father, saying that he seemed to have started looking down on him again since he dared to talk such nonsense. He twisted the Duke's arms behind his back so that the crunch of bones could be heard, and continued to say that it means that the Duke uses such methods to raise his daughter, and apparently, he listens only to those who are the same level as him or stronger than him. The servants were terrified to see their master being led out, bent over and with his hands tied. Hexion made it more and more painful for him, trying to convey his message about violence. And in the end, he added that from now on, he is his master, and he is only a worm under his feet. With these words, he twisted the Duke's arms so that he growled in impotent rage. Only now, Hexion saw a standing Adele, at the sight of whom his eyes lit up, and he asked how his lady was. Our heroine asked in confusion how he got here, still not believing what was happening. With a gentle smile, the knight shared that he simply felt that she needed him. At that moment, he heard a furious cry behind him. What the hell was making such a noise here? Karan flew in, rolling his eyes in a frenzied rage, asking his father what kind of bastard this was, referring to Hexion. Hexion mockingly replied, "Who is he then, that he comes in like this with insults?" And generally noted that Karan's manners were terrible. Naturally, the fire element took over, and Karan, like a volcano, screamed in rage at Hexion, asking who he was. He slapped the knight's hand that held his father and froze with wide eyes. Anger overwhelmed him, but no matter how much force Karan applied, it had no effect on Hexion. So he decided that the rumors that this knight was a monster weren't such rumors. The knight himself only smiled cheerfully, looking at Karan, after which he casually released the Duke, who staggered forward. Karan approached his father, asking if he was okay. Hexion spoke up again, focusing attention on the guy's behavior. Judging by his deliberate behavior and terrible manners, he concluded that in front of him was the very second illustrious son of the ducal house of Karan Wit. Karan turned into an uncontrollable whirlwind again and roared, asking Hexion who he was then. The knight easily dodged Karan's blow. Then he grabbed Karan by the throat with one hand and lifted him up, accompanied by Bella's squeal. Hexion looked at the guy and asked if he hadn't been taught manners to be careful with those he met in his miserable life. Therefore, he turned to the Duke, noting that if anyone needed to be punished, it was the child, while Karan, exhausted, tried to set Hexion on fire. At this time, the Duke, standing nearby, glared at his son. Karan couldn't believe that his father wasn't interfering. Was even he against him? At that moment, his father apologized to Hexion for showing disrespect and asked him to let his son go. Hexion unclenched his fist and released Karan, who fell to the floor with a crash. The knight, smiling sweetly, declared that he was simply wasting his time here. The law stipulated mutual consent between families, which meant that the bride could move in with her future husband before the wedding. The Duke turned white as a sheet when he heard that his bride was moving in with him. Karan, having forgotten about the recent pain, burst into a piercing scream, accusing Hexion of who he was to say such a thing. The Grand Duke became lost in thought, like a child, as if he had forgotten something important. And then, blinking my eyes, I remembered that I had forgotten one important detail. He looked at Adele, whom everyone had forgotten, and asked his lady if she agreed. With a smile, her savior promised that if she felt uncomfortable with him, she could always stay somewhere else. Cursing, the girl stood motionless, and the knight asked her to answer honestly. Finally, in a hoarse voice, our heroine asked him to take her away from here if it wouldn't bother him. The Duke screamed in rage as he felt his puppet slipping away. Hexion, without taking his eyes off her, declared that it would be an honor for him and extended his hand to her. Adele extended her hand to him, and he said that he would show her the way. As she followed Hexion, she glanced back at the Duke, who was keeping his eyes on her. Smiling, Adele thanked his lordship. As they left, they and the Duke were still looking at each other. The Duke's face was distorted with anger, and Adele finally told him that one day he would regret what he had done to her. And I noticed that he was the only one here who didn't know his place. The Duke froze with silent shock on his face. Karan stood in her way, screaming that she was crazy for actually deciding to leave with some bastard she knew nothing about. Hexion sternly ordered them to retreat, saying that no matter how you teach some rats manners, they still go back to their old ways. An enraged Karan broke out in a sweat as the knight and Adele passed him. He could not yet comprehend that Adele was leaving his power and control like this. In a commanding tone, swearing, he ordered her to obey. Hexion glared at him, but Adele just let out a heavy breath. The girl said that no matter what he did, it would still be better than staying in this rotten place. She declared that people like him had no right to bully her any longer. Karan turned white, just like his father, and even asked again, not believing that she had actually said that. And they walked along the corridor under the gaze of the Duke, Karan, and the servants. Finally, Hexion promised to send invitations when they set a wedding date, but he wasn't sure that they would dare to show up there. The Duke looked from under his brow, saying nothing. Suddenly, Adele stopped and gasped. The Duchess stood right in front of her, her eyes full of surprise, anxiety, and even horror. The girl wondered if their ill-fated relationship would end here and now. So Adele told the Duchess that, as she had wished, she was leaving her house right now. Hexion hurried to take his wife away as he turned to her and asked her to accept his condolences. The Duchess was also in a deep state of shock and therefore did not react immediately. Having shouted out a question about how this should be understood, she turned around and, together with her husband and son, watched her stepdaughter walk away. When Hexion and Adele had driven quite a distance, he asked about the room where she was imprisoned, whether it had always been her room. The girl sadly said that this is a punishment room. As a child, she always saw the doors of this room closed. Hexion shuddered as he imagined the dark room full of dirt and dust, horrified to realize that Adele had been tortured throughout her childhood. He also, with complete seriousness, the knight said that as soon as they arrived, she would eat 3 times a day plus snacks. Objections that she couldn't fit that much were not accepted. They laughed and joked about how any gust of wind could blow her away. Then Hexion said that Karan Vita knew her real name. Adele was surprised to remember what she called him when they were still children. She was surprised that he still remembered it, to which Hexion joked that he was offended that now he was not the only one who knew her real name. The girl turned her face away and muttered that a name was just one of the ways to address someone, and she didn't know that he attached such importance to it. When the man explained her burden of having to bear a false name for years, Adele exclaimed that she had found the diary of the real Karen Witta in that room. In that room, the Duke grabbed him, but Adele managed to read, Karen Witta led him during Karat's illness, describing all the fears and torments. And thanks to the magic of the fairies, Adele read it and whiled away her days in the darkness. Hexion understood what the girl felt as her illness progressed. Our heroine's heart sank, wondering if Hexion had to endure unbearable pain as well. He decided to defuse the situation by saying that the recordings were apparently very sad, since Adele had such a sad face. The girl objected that it wasn't all that bad, but the knight was curious whether she had taken a liking to that Karen. Adele replied that not at all. She has so many problems now that she does not want to waste her feelings on others. Sometimes it seemed to her that he was reading her thoughts. Or maybe he just knew more than he was saying. She forgot about everything when she saw the magnificence of his castle. That very quiet place on the hill. The girl froze. If you think about it, they are far from the capital, so could this really be all the possessions of the Grand Duke? He commented with a smile on her face that it was a rather secluded place, although sometimes fellow travelers wandered in there. The man admitted that he was worried about whether she would like the place and asked her to make herself at home. As soon as they crossed the gate, a butler approached, who said that the gentleman said that he would set the wedding date himself, but he never expected to bring such a beautiful young lady so quickly. Adele was frightened by such attention. All the servants of the palace lined up, and Hexion explained that, although it sounded a little unexpected, this lady would now live here. Just as he was about to introduce her, he hesitated, not knowing what to call her. Adele took matters into her own hands with a smile, asking that she be called Karen Witta and that she be taken care of. But then her face became sad. Even after leaving the Duke's palace, she cannot get rid of this name. The butler noticed the change in mood. The man introduced himself as his lordship's butler, whose name was Orlando, and said that it was an honor for him to meet the lady. He resorted to a trick, citing that his memory was no longer what it used to be, and that he had forgotten her name. And so, he asked her to go and meet the old man and repeat her name. The girl gasped and hesitantly said that her name was Adele. Orlando then suggested calling her by her middle name when they were alone. A smile played across Adele's face. This man was so kind and seemed to read her thoughts. Meanwhile, Orlando offered to take Adele to her chambers. Already on the stairs, Hexion said that they would see each other when the food was prepared. But for now, she should rest. Adele smiled back at him, and only now remembered that she was wearing a nightgown. But then the girl was overcome with a real fire of shame, because she had been locked in that room for a week and had not taken a bath. She rushed upstairs to Orlando, asking him to prepare a bath for her. The butler said that he had already assigned a maid to her and asked permission to take her to her room. The girl, shrunk with shame, thanked him, remembering that she had also been riding a horse for so long. When the man opened the door, a beautiful, cozy room opened up to her, and the butler explained that she might not like it, but the gentleman had spent a lot of time preparing it. Our heroine's mouth dropped open in surprise. Were they really sure that she would come here? Orlando, on the orders of his master, cleaned this room every day, but the Grand Duke himself could not imagine that she would decide on such a bold step. Then, Adele realized for herself that Hexion had not lost hope that she would accept his proposal. The butler expressed his joy that his master had such an ally, and that if she needed anything, they would rush over immediately. Adele kept thanking him. Then Orlando asked him not to be so formal. She understood that the butler wanted her to be on first-name terms with him, but she couldn't bring herself to do so, and, in general, she needed time. He again seemed to read her thoughts, saying that she was the bride of the Grand Duke, and in the future, she would become the Grand Duchess. Adele still could not realize that she was no longer a puppet. Therefore, she will never miss the chance to live the way she wants, and bowed with a grateful smile. Adele promised that she would try, to which Orlando responded with gratitude and bowed. After the bath, Adele felt much better. Her maids arrived and were nice and friendly. Unlike Bella, Julie and Frey were beaming with goodwill. Now the girl realized that she had left the estate so quickly that she had not taken anything with her. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Hexion appeared at the door and kindly asked if she had rested, and if so, he suggested that they go downstairs together to eat. Adele was amazed that he had come such a long way to call her to eat, instead of sending one of the servants. Hexion glowed with sincerity and assured that he himself wanted to come here. Our heroine remembered that they really hadn't seen each other for a long time, and he needed the gift of healing. The knight smiled, even standing next to her. He didn't need any medicine. He could even breathe easily. The girl breathed a sigh of relief, and the Duke suggested they go down. While they were going down, Adele kept wanting to ask where his chambers were, and was very surprised to learn that they were on the first floor. Usually, the master's chambers were on the second. Hexion explained this by saying that he was screaming in his sleep. When they arrived, the table was set with a variety of dishes. The knight had a good appetite and constantly reminded Adele to eat well. The girl did not miss the fact that he still had not taken off his gloves. She asked if he even wore them at home. It was just that Adele didn't understand how it was so inconvenient. And here everyone was her own. And she was surprised when Hexion admitted that everyone came to work here for a lot of money, and not everyone would want to see his hand. Everything was new for Adele. The most beautiful interior, thought out to the smallest detail. The most delicious dishes on the table. The garden they walked through was so beautiful. The servants were friendly, but it turned out that they didn't want to be there at all. Still, Adele didn't think that everyone would be so fussed if they were afraid of him. After spending just a few hours in the estate, she was able to draw conclusions. While she was thinking that he still needed to open up to people, Hexen was chattering that she needed to buy everything. Otherwise, they would leave the Duke's estate so quickly. And then the girl jumped up. She hadn't taken a single thing from the estate, saying that someone needed to be sent for her things. However, the knight objected that there was no point in preserving the memory of that family. He could buy her whatever she wanted. Our heroine resisted with fervor, proving that he had already done so much for her. His hand lay on her hand. The man asked her to calm down and explained that now all the benefits of this estate were hers too. He has so much money that it is gathering dust without being used, because no amount of wealth could lighten his burden. An alarmed Adele feared that his condition had worsened. He admitted that this was one of the reasons why he so wanted to see her, but he could not even imagine what was going on there, regretting that he had not arrived earlier. The girl didn't even think about how much pain he was in, and now she was tormented by a feeling of guilt. Then the conversation smoothly turned to the topic of food. After dinner, he wished her good night. When Adele disappeared, Hexen exhaled that finally. He winced, amazed at the thought of why he had thought of this. A thought flashed through his head, but it slipped away from him in the blink of an eye. Everything was swimming before his eyes. He needed to somehow get to his room. There was only one pill left. When he takes pills, the attacks become less frequent. But even after taking them, the pain only subsides for a moment. And for some reason, he is sure that they only cause harm. When he ate, everything was fine. But as soon as Adele took a couple of steps away, he felt very ill. Having barely reached the room, he fell to his knees, coughing, not having enough air, the pain becoming unbearable. Hexen whispered her name before losing consciousness. Despite being tired, Adele didn't sleep. The pillow smelled fresh, and the girl understood how much effort Hexen had put into making her like the room. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Hexen couldn't find his place here. He was so pale today. The girl tried to convince herself that she had imagined it all and that sleep was not coming, but she could not do anything about it. She was also worried that she had forgotten her notebook at the estate, but she remembered all the notes from the second obelisk. But the more she read, the more suspicious what was written seemed to her. She decided to read them together with Hexen. She couldn't sleep. She had eaten so much that she was thirsty. Adele decided to drink a glass of water, thinking that it would definitely make her fall asleep. Of course, she could have called the maid, but the girl was ashamed to wake a man in the middle of the night for a glass of water. Still, the estate was huge. Adele even forgot where the kitchen was. Suddenly, she was stopped by some kind of scream or yell. Out of fear, our heroine at first even thought that it was a ghost, but then decided that she had simply misheard. Hearing a repeated groan, she almost screamed herself. It was Hexen's voice. She approached the door. Apparently, these were his chambers, and she also heard his screams. Knocking hesitantly, she timidly asked if he was okay, but it felt like he was in agony, so he couldn't answer. Adele had to help him. Opening the door, she asked permission to help him, but Hexen was convulsing, unconscious, pale, and sweating. Our heroine ran towards him. Running up to his bed, I noticed that the knight had something in his hand. In his clenched fist was the brush she had given him. The girl scolded him for not asking for help, since they lived in the same house, and took his hands in hers. She wanted to heal him so much he couldn't die, because he swore to help her. He ran with the thought that he should have helped her earlier. He shouldn't have delayed the preparations for so long. Some soldier ran in, shouting, "Your Grace!" Hexen, wet in the rain, was running somewhere. The clatter of approaching horses could be heard. He kept thinking that he couldn't die like this. His body, he felt it crumble into pieces again. And then, a flash of light. The last thought was to protect her. But then she woke up. Realizing that he was in his room, the knight realized that he had had that dream again. Turning his head, he saw that he was not alone in the room. Adele fell asleep with her head in her hands, not letting go of his hand. Hexen stood up, not understanding when she was able to come here, remembering that he apparently forgot to lock the door. Looking at the girl, he realized that Adele had caught him in the middle of an attack and was apparently trying to help. Could it really be that same ability that she showed him in the forest? But now he could breathe so easily and freely. Gently touching her face, the man tried to wake her up. It was unlikely that she would have been able to get enough sleep in that position. Adele jumped up without understanding anything, and Hexen brightened everything up with humor, saying that she still hadn't woken up, so he decided to get closer to her. The girl bashfully jumped back and began to apologize for entering his room without permission. He thanked her for her help and apologized for her finding him in such an unflattering state. Adele didn't think it was anything unpleasant, but it hurt him. She asked why he didn't call her, because her mere presence eased his suffering. He compared her to a sweet candy that gets sweeter every day. Gradually, he said, therefore, you need to curb your feelings. And he reminded Adele of his promise to help her and to keep his promise. The girl understood what he meant, but still didn't understand what he was getting at. It was as if lightning struck Adele when Hexion said that it was a mere trifle. He needed to go to the capital. She saw that Hexion was trying to talk as if it was a trifle, to settle things, to get new medicines. But he would meet with the emperor himself. People said that the emperor was a very peculiar person of mood, so she prayed that everything would go smoothly for Hexion. The next wave of shock was that he might return at sunset, or the trip might take several days. The knight hastened to reassure her that if the duke's men decided to break in, Orlando and his knights would take care of it. But this was far from what worried Adele. She was worried about when he would arrive in the capital, and Hexion joked so sweetly that it was just that the girl blushed. Afterwards, the knight asked her to fulfill one of his requests. It turned out that he wanted her to touch his hand. When she gave permission and he placed his hand on hers, the girl froze. Their faces were so close, and Hexion was looking at her. His heart was pounding like crazy as he approached and hugged her tightly. He blushed and hugged her, stroking her hair and whispering her name. It seemed like time had stopped. It was so warm, but I wanted these moments not to end. The emperor himself knew that enough time had passed since their last meeting. Hexion needed new medicines, and he had to account for the deeds he had done. After all, he must know that he and his every step are being followed. Even now, people hiding in robes kept an eye on his palace, while Hexion and Adel sat hugging each other. Seeing Adele, the maid asked in fear if Milady had gone for a walk, since she had not found her in her chambers. Adele looked away and awkwardly said that she simply wanted to see the Grand Duke. The maids were fussing around her to make sure the bath was ready. Sitting in the bath, our heroine decided to ask Frey a question. It often happens that after going to the imperial palace, the Grand Duke stays there for a long time. She became scared when she heard that, yes, sometimes the Duke leaves for a couple of days, but sometimes he stays there for a long time. Adele remembered the day when she finished attending etiquette lessons, and the Duke decided to introduce her to the Emperor. How she tried. She was sweating all over from excitement. Then she heard the words that it was quite good. He didn't say another word, but Adele remembered his cold voice and terrifying look. Suddenly, one of the maids asked her what she thought of their master. Seeing that the question made the girl blush, Frey explained that many people simply misunderstood their master. The girl passionately assured that the gentleman was very caring and that his illness was not contagious. Adele listened and couldn't believe it. The girl was sincerely trying to present Hexion in the best possible light, adding that she had been working there for 5 years, describing him as a very caring and kind person. It looked so cute that our heroine laughed. The maid was confused, thinking that she had said something unnecessary. Still, the people in this estate were on his side, and she sincerely hoped that he would be able to open up to them. Just as Hexion appeared, the table was already set. He asked if she was tired, feeling guilty for not getting enough sleep. Adele assured him that she wouldn't have been able to fall asleep in the new environment anyway, and besides, she had been troubled by various thoughts all night. She wanted to discuss with him what was written on the second obelisk. Hexion excitedly asked if she had taken the translation with her. Adele explained that she had not, but she remembered everything. However, she was worried that the Duke might find that book. As long as he obeyed the Emperor, he would be in danger. The knight's face was full of seriousness, and he asked if the second obelisk really contained information that even the Emperor himself did not know. It was just Adele's guess, but she said that the lines mentioned Carlot's illness and her connection with the first Emperor. Hexion shuddered at these words. The first part was written about an old tree and a crying voice coming from the center of the forest, its heart. People became curious, and they cut down the tree. On the first obelisk, this was also described. What was hidden in the tree came out into the world. Immediately after this event, an epidemic swept through the empire, and at the same time, one man began his rise. He declared himself a messenger of God and began to clear the lands of the epidemic. Hexion named this man Albo Vestia Eterno. His exploits became legendary, and he himself became known as the One Followed by the Sun. Adele came to the conclusion that there was a connection between Carlot's illness and the first emperor, and the knight revealed that before he was brought to the palace, he managed to hide on the city streets for 2 weeks. However, when they caught him and brought him back, the first thing the emperor did was hand him poison. It looked like regular juice, but when the bottle was opened, it turned into smoke, and his body instantly absorbed it. Adele didn't expect this. It turns out the emperor has a supply of this poison. Hexion knew that the only person in the empire who had a cure to slow the progress of the disease was the emperor himself, and any noble who dared to go against him would be susceptible to this disease. Even if you look through the archives, everyone who contracted Carlet's disease was somehow connected to the imperial family. The emperor is able to control the disease at will, and he uses this as an advantage in his political games. A pale Adele wondered if the real Karen Witt had died at the hands of the emperor, all in order to weaken Duke Witt's defense. It's just a theory, but it was written on the obelisk, and Hexion himself hoped that they would find more information on the next obelisk. The location of the next obelisk was already known, so Adele really hoped to find information there. They agreed to go to the third obelisk when he returned from the palace, but Adele was not at peace with the fact that he would go to the palace to the emperor. He definitely wanted to go there. Hexion tried to keep his tone lighthearted and assured her that he would be back in a flash. The knight said that for his own sake and hers, he must return unharmed. Adele said that she believed in him and would wait. At this time, the Hexion crew arrived in the capital. He got out of the carriage intending to go to the palace. However, now Hexion felt better than usual, telling himself that he was okay, because this time she would be waiting for him, and he had business to complete. The blonde-haired guy said mockingly that he knew Hexion would come back here, calling him so predictable. Hexion stopped and turned to the man, calling him Caliph and saying that he was true to himself. He enjoys humiliating others, thus stroking his ego at the expense of others. He mockingly asked the Caliph why he did not ask His Majesty to pay him at least a little attention. Hexion trampled him harder and harder, calling him so pathetic that he made you want to pity him. He also advised him to be more prudent. He did not become crown prince just because he became famous for his prudence, and he advised me not to lose my head because of some pathetic jealousy, after which he took his leave and prepared to go to the emperor. The Caliph looked at Hexion's back. No matter how disgusting it was, this bastard, as he called Hexion, exiled or killed all the brothers and sisters who stood in his way. The Caliph could not understand why his father was so favorable to this bastard and completely ignored him, his heir. He really wanted to know what secret his so-called brother, whom she called a worthless person, was hiding. The closer Hexion got to the throne room, the more he convinced himself to pull himself together. He had no right to make a mistake. Entering the hall, the knight understood that he had to behave. The emperor began by saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. The war in the north had ended long ago, but he had heard that Hexion was doing well in the position of duke. Hexion replied that this was only due to the care of His Majesty. The emperor responded by laughing and ordering tea to be brought to them. Sitting down on the sofa and looking at the duke, His Highness noted that he looked good. He added mockingly that this might be due to the fact that Hexion had been taking too many liberties lately, including taking the duke's daughter away without permission. As it turned out, Duke Witt had arrived here just that morning with a complaint. While they were pouring tea, Hexion learned that Duke Vida had arrived in the morning, demanding the return of Adele. Watching the emperor, Hexion realized that he was testing him, but was not going to listen. He chuckled and decided to take action, replying that he fell in love at first sight. This interested His Highness, and Hexion shared that Lady Vita was the first who did not turn away from him despite the rumors, and she also held his hand. Lost in his memories, the young duke recalled his feelings when Adele took his hands. Those feelings cannot be described in words. The sensations from her touch and emotions made Hexion forget for a while where he was and with whom. Smiling contentedly, the emperor thoughtfully asked if Hexion had really fallen in love with this girl. Hexion confirmed his words and asked to get married as soon as possible so that he could live in his estate. The emperor stated that in the end, he himself wanted to bring them together, and that his son also asked him for something for the first time. The cup of tea trembled in Hexion's hand from the disgust when the emperor called him his son. The emperor also said that she would throw a ball in honor of the engagement, wanting to see how good-looking Duke Vida's daughter is. Hexion froze at these words. A ball where all attention would be focused on him and Adele. When the guy muttered that he would like to do without unnecessary fuss, a cold, piercing gaze shot through him. He continued to speak in a language that brooked no objection, that there would be a ball, he would inform about the date, and asked if Hexion wanted to discuss anything else with him. Hexion had no choice but to answer that there was nothing else to do. Suddenly, the emperor's hand firmly and powerfully covered his hand. He said that he still had to check whether this girl was worthy of becoming the Grand Duke's bride. With obvious satisfaction, he examined Hexion's hand, pulling off the glove, saying that there was no deterioration. Hexion himself sat as if lifeless, while the emperor asked with a grin whether he had shown the hand of the duke's daughter. The duke replied that no, but the emperor, without taking his eyes off her, noted that when they got married, they would still have to show it, and mockingly added, "What if the bride ran away on their wedding night?" But he himself answered that this girl was not in a position to run away somewhere. He heard that she was beside herself with happiness after receiving Hexion's offer. Having tapped his son's stone hand, the emperor concluded that he still considered them an ideal couple, but still feared her reaction to this deformity. He then asked when Hexion last took his medicine, and replied that it was this morning. The emperor ordered the servant to leave, stating that he wanted to speak with Hexion alone. When the door closed and they were alone, the emperor said that the medicine should already have left the body. Hexion winced as the pain shot through him. He felt a sharp pain in his chest. The emperor asked how much time had passed since the last meeting. It was time to have a heart-to-heart talk. Meanwhile, she also thought that if the emperor was truly able to control Carlet's illness, then he could very well harm Hexion. The girl prayed that he would be safe, and that he would not end up in an even worse situation because of her. She was distracted from her thoughts by a knock and the door opening onto the balcony. It was Adele reminded that she had just recently had lunch and even eaten dessert, but Frey happily announced that it was a whole 2 hours ago and it was time to try some new sweets. Our heroine herself was surprised that 2 whole hours had passed. She smiled and awkwardly noted that if she ate like that, she would get fat. But Frey didn't see any downsides to being fat, saying that my lady was like a match. All kinds of desserts were laid out on the table. Adele sat sad and thoughtful. The maid thought that she didn't like the tea. The girl shared her concerns about Hexion and the duchy. Frey clarified whether my lady meant her house. All the worries were connected with the diary. If one of the estate members found it, trouble would be inevitable. Frey suggested going and picking up the item, but Adele dismissed the idea. It was too dangerous right now. She understood that Karan was now living in the estate, and the Duke was waiting for her there. It was too dangerous. You can ask Jin for help, but asking him to break into her house and take something is also too much. However, the girl thought that it was still worth telling Jin about the obelisks, but first, she needed to consult with Hexion. Frey suggested taking a break and changing the scenery by visiting the estate's library. As she put it, her master is a great lover of literature. They have a wide variety of rare books, letters, and everything in 10 copies. It was surprising to Adele that Duke Hexion was such a great lover of books. The maid's words made my heart beat faster as she praised the knight, saying that all servants are irreparably indebted to their master, and that they are ready to do anything for him. She smiled. Here Hexion can be truly free. He is so loved here. And Adele decided to go to the library, and Frey went to accompany her. As they Karan shouted that there was no need to talk nonsense. He ordered to drag Adele. They had family matters. From the voice, she understood that Karan had arrived, and fear gripped her heart. Frey fearfully suggested that they wait upstairs. The butler would definitely sort this out, but Adele and the voice that appeared on the stairs said that she would take care of everything herself. Karan was clearly surprised that she appeared like that, and Adele asked him what his question was. He said angrily, "Who does she think she is? So special that he's not even worthy of seeing her face." He stated that she lives a comfortable life here without even knowing what kind of place it is, calling Hexion a monster. Adele then stopped such talk about her fiancé. The man began to caustically tease her that she was behaving arrogantly, but Adele told him to go home, saying that he was behaving arrogantly. Karan, narrowing his eyes in rage, asked why she didn't return home to avoid her father's wrath. He became even more angry when he heard that that place had never been her home. Karan reminded him who exactly made her a noblewoman. Adele herself became indignant when she remembered how Duke Vita had taken her life, disposing of it as he pleased, as if it belonged to him. In her heart, the girl said everything that had been building up for many years. She did not want to die with a gold spoon in her mouth. Between returning to the duchy, she would prefer to leave as a vagabond and enjoy her freedom. Karan froze and spoke hesitantly as to what she was saying, as if he was thinking about what to answer. Her look was full of will and determination. Karan didn't understand what was wrong with her, how it seemed like she wasn't Adele, how and when she could have changed so much. Her cold tone told him to return home. This is the only place where he will be safe. Karan tried to say that she was going too far to make their father want her dead. However, Adele sadly replied that he is a true descendant of the Witt family, so he will never understand her thoughts. She thought that the incident with the carriage could still be expected, but even if the illness was the emperor's doing, it did not forgive the Duke for his actions. And so, Duke Vita remains her enemy, and she declared out loud to Karan that she was sick and tired of enduring his cruelty. She told him straight out that his face alone made her sick, and that she would prefer never to see him again. He barely restrained himself, but replied that she was mistaken. He had never been a model son. This only concerned Paris. Karan cursed and declared that they were both fakes and she knew nothing. Our heroine asked what he was saying. It turns out he is not the Duke's son. The servants fell silent after Karan's confession that he had always considered Adele and himself to be birds of a feather. He wanted to say something else, but his face distorted. The man called it disgusting that he had to crucify himself here in front of some bastard servants. Adele seemed to be petrified. Her thoughts were racing at a furious speed. And if this was some kind of joke, even if he and the Duke don't look alike, he and the Duchess have the same face. While the girl was trying to figure out whose son he was, Karan, cursing that everything was going wrong, summoned fire. The fireball flew at the butler, who was knocked off his feet. Karan demanded that Adele come down before he blew the place to hell. The girl screamed at him, calling for him to stop. Suddenly, a calm voice asked him to explain what was going on here. Karan's angry gaze glanced sideways at the voice that addressed that it seemed that the Duchy of Wit could not contain its dog. Hexion returned and asked Karan why he had broken into his house and caused a commotion. The butler was thrown back violently and could barely stand on his feet. The knight looked at the servants, the wounded Orlando, and the frightened Frey. Then he asked if Adele was hurt, and the girl assured him that she was okay. Even one glance was enough for Hexion to understand what had just happened here. Turning to Karan, the Duke said that he had recklessly burst into his estate and, sweeping away everything in his path, ignored the servants' attempts to restrain him. Hexion's eyes lit up with the fire of revenge for the fact that they dared to raise a hand against his servants. Karan was thrown against the wall by a powerful blow. He only had time to scream, feeling the force sweeping him off his feet. The knight contemptuously threw the entire Wit family at him. This is how Wit behaves, breaking into the estate when the owner is not there. Karan snapped back without losing his temper. Shouting that Hexion was a bastard, he began to summon fiery power. Adele was horrified that he was going to use this power on Hexion. Hexion turned at her cry to dodge to the left. A fiery whirlwind overtook the knight. He couldn't believe how Adele found out. Magic can't be seen. At this time, standing at the top of the stairs, Adele shouted at Karan that he had completely lost his mind. Just like then, Karan had already finally realized that Adele knew something about his magic. He asked her about it, but our heroine was outraged to the limit. He had just attacked a man, and that was all he could say. Karan shouted that didn't she notice that the bastard attacked him first? Hexion lifted him up with his power and said that it seemed like he had completely forgotten what he had just done. The knight's eyes pierced Karan, and he asked if since he did not realize his guilt, maybe he should just kill him. Karan still believed that only Hexion was to blame for kidnapping Adele from her father's home. Hexion could no longer contain the rage that had overwhelmed him and pressed Karan ever harder. Adele asked Hexion to stop and just let Karan go. She came up to him and touched him, such warmth emanating from her. He let go of Karan, agreeing with Adele that he had become overly excited. He threw back at Karan that the emperor had already approved their engagement, and why didn't outsiders have the right to vote? Therefore, he demanded that they leave his estate immediately. Otherwise, he would send an official complaint to the Duke of Wit. Cursing, Karan had to obey, but he promised that the next time they met, Hexion would not get off so easily. And finally, he looked at Adele. Karan's eyes were no longer full of rage. On the contrary, he calmly looked at her with some expectation and said her name, after which he silently turned around and left. Hexion examined Adele to see if she was injured, but the girl was worried about Orlando and the destroyed wall. She felt guilty and began to apologize, although Hexion claimed that she was not at fault. He himself said that he should ask her forgiveness for scaring her. Here, Adele noticed that his condition had worsened. He was sweating heavily. Her hand lay on his face, and the man blushed and gasped. The girl asked if he was hurt anywhere. With the air of an expert, Adele matter-of-factly confirmed that, as she thought, he was still in a fever. The increased heartbeat was confirmation of this. Hexion only smiled slyly, mentally answering that it was all because of her. Our heroine ordered Frey to prepare chambers for the Duke, since Orlando was wounded. Orlando tried to convince her that he was okay, but Adele took matters into her own hands. Hexion intervened, asking Adele if she was busy with anything at the moment, and the girl replied that she was not. He asked her hesitantly to spend some time with him. Adele gasped, and he added that he thought it would be more useful than just lying in bed. She nodded, saying that she would change and come to him. Looking at the Duke's back, The girl thought that he probably hadn't eaten anything and needed to prepare a snack for him. She called Frey and asked if there were any snacks in the kitchen. Frey promised to do everything with admiration, idolizing the new mistress. From her, Adele learned that whenever the gentleman returned from the imperial palace, he was in a bad mood. Even Orlando did not dare to approach him. But today, for the first time, the gentleman softened so quickly. Frey was sincerely happy for her master, because usually he refused food. But today, everything would be different. Instead of setting the table, Adele ordered that it be set on the terrace, since the weather was wonderful. As Hexion passed by, he called out to Adele, waiting for her. She asked how he was feeling, and the knight replied that he was already much better. The girl walked briskly over his complexion, noting it was pale, and ordered him to take off his glove. So he felt like a child and immediately carried out the order. In the tone of a doctor, Adele asked how he slept and whether he ate well in the imperial palace. The man replied with a grin that he slept well and was not starved. While Adele was treating his hand, she realized that he was lying. It was obvious just by his appearance. And then Hexion told him about the ball in honor of their engagement at the imperial palace. Hexion felt awkward. He justified himself by saying that this was the emperor's condition and he could not refuse him. During the conversation, the girl asked to tell her details. It turned out that she also had to be present. Their engagement would be announced in front of everyone. Our heroine nodded, declaring that she would begin preparations for the banquet as soon as the date was set. Hexion asked, "So that means she agrees, because this is a banquet with the emperor himself, and besides, she can meet the duke there." With her eyes burning and full of determination, the girl replied that he was in greater danger than she was, and besides, they would be together, and she also didn't want to become a burden for him, so they would go through this side by side. While she was healing him, the knight realized that now his lady was much stronger than him. Joy flashed across Adele's face because she saw that the knight was much better. He actually said that the cold had almost disappeared, and therefore they would soon go together to the third obelisk. And although Adele promised him to ease the symptoms of his illness, she still decided to take a little break in order to get rid of the accumulated stress. For some reason, it seemed to her that Hexion didn't take care of himself at all. When she said that she was worried about him, because they were bound by a promise, the Duke looked at her in some amazement, wondering if she really didn't trust him and was worried about the agreement. Having made sure that everything was as he thought, he sadly replied that she could break their agreement at any time. Now Adele looked at him with an uncomprehending gaze. The knight shrank back and dryly replied that if he had done something wrong, then let her point out his mistake, feeling the bitterness of her distrust. While the maid was setting the table on the terrace, something was shrinking from their dialogue. Adele was trying to understand what was wrong with the Duke, and the Duke was saying that it seemed to him that she did not trust him. Our heroine stared at the man in surprise, wondering why he decided that something was wrong with her. Hexion shook his head in horror. Of course not. She was his only one. Frey choked on her tea when she heard her master lament that if such a thing were possible, he would want Adele to be with him for the rest of his life. Adele froze and asked again what he had just said. Hexion blushed and stared at her. All of this blurted out in his emotions. Drenched in sweat and completely red, he tried to say something in defense, and Adele was worried that he would catch a cold again since he was all sweaty. Therefore, having decided to do something, the girl stated that she had not tried to offend him at all. Frey never ceased to be amazed at what she heard. My lady was telling her master that he was very important to her, and therefore she did not want any trouble for him, asking her not to take everything on her shoulders and to share her burdens with her. Smiling softly and tenderly, Adele said that if her presence made him feel better, she would gladly stay by his side, just so long as he didn't keep everything to himself. Hexion was so pleased to hear this and nodded in appreciation. After they ate and went to rest, Hexion opened his eyes. It was dark. Sitting up in bed, he looked for Adele. She fell asleep next to him, holding his hand, although he asked her to go to his room as soon as he fell asleep, because it was so uncomfortable for her to sleep. Looking at how she fell asleep, Hexion realized that Adele did not even dare to climb into bed. Just now, his left hand began to move. He was able to feel it. Although she did not fully recover, the symptoms of the disease never receded so clearly. Her gift was truly a miracle. The man leaned over the sleeping Adele, and he carefully took her hand with his healthy hand. He tried to remember when it all began, when he began to be afraid to touch the one whose hand he had previously held so carelessly, when he became afraid that in the future his feelings would only grow. After all, this curse, like a plague, surrounds his loved ones and brings them death or misfortune. And for her, who is trying to free herself from her own shackles, His curse can only bring trouble. That's why he keeps telling himself that their relationship is just a contract, although in reality, he is trying to hide his feelings. He wished that there was someone next to her who could make her at least a little happier, because now he didn't even dare touch her. She was like a jewel to him that could only be desired. But if he allowed greed to overshadow his feelings, would she be able to accept him completely? It was morning, and our heroine muttered something in her sleep while stretching. Hexian stood by the window and asked if it was so bright that he should draw the curtains. He added that if she was tired, she could sleep some more. The girl sleepily muttered that she needed another 5 minutes. Then she suddenly opened her eyes because something was wrong. Having looked around the room in fear, she did not understand why Hexian was in her chambers, and she froze with horror on her face, realizing that she was in his room. Apparently, she had fallen asleep again. Moreover, she is lying in his bed, which is why she muttered why she is in bed and not next to her. He replied with a smile that it seemed to him that it would be more comfortable to sleep this way, and besides, the bed was big enough for two. And then it finally began to dawn on her that she had slept with Hexian, and burning with shame, she rushed under the blanket. She muttered that she could take care of herself, but he didn't hear her, so she asked him if it was better already. The man happily shared that it was thanks to her. Yes, if only she had seen how he moved his hand. Her face appeared from under the blanket, and the girl replied that this was happiness. With a beaming face, Hexian reported that he felt cheerful and healthy, as if the last days in the palace had never happened, and therefore they could go to the third obelisk. He was eager to go for a walk, but Adele was still worried and advised him not to rush in such a hurry. Yesterday he had a fever. Sitting down next to him, the knight said that they didn't have much time. The banquet would take place next week. Until he met the emperor again, Hexian wanted to learn as much as he could about the emperor's connection to the illness of the obelisk's Scarlet. Adele understood him, but made him promise that she would not overexert herself during their journey. Our heroine also remembered that she had nothing to wear for the trip, but Hexian told her not to worry. As it turned out, the clothes had already been prepared. Even before she moved here, the knight had prepared and thought through everything down to the smallest detail. Adele thought, since she moved here, she wore a lot of outfits, and they all fit her like a glove. So she asked him this question. Our heroine almost fell through the ground from his revelation that he gave the master measurements based on the memories of their embrace in the forest. And this happened only twice. Alarmed, Hexian blushed like a tomato, trying to justify himself, saying there were no dirty thoughts. He began to talk nonsense about his hands, which instinctively, thereby causing Adele to shrink and blush even more. Frey brought her an outfit for the road and waited for a reaction. Adele noted that the suit fits well. It is comfortable, and it is the first time she has worn trousers that are not intended to be worn under a dress. The maid also put a pen and a notebook in the bag. The maid also said that right now the master is arguing with Orlando about the fact that there was too much luggage. The servants, as usual, lined up at the stairs. Hexian noted that even their best horse would not be able to pull such a load. But the butler didn't think so. He thought the luggage was much lighter than it seemed, and he also said that he had put something special for the master and lady. The Duke noticed a huge roll on the back of the horse, which was barely holding back tears. As she left, Adele froze when she heard the butler say that he had prepared a tent in case the gentleman and lady had to spend the night in the forest. The girl said that their trip would not last that long. For some reason, last time she wasn't worried that they could spend the night in the forest together. So why was she so worried now? Hexian blushed and, to hide his awkwardness, turned his head away, pretending to cough, and said that they definitely had enough blankets. The young couple had to retreat when Orlando asked them why they were both so sweaty and flushed. Having mounted their horse, they set off on their journey. Both of them felt awkward, and neither of them dared to speak first. Finally, turning her head towards him, our heroine started talking about the luggage, glad that Orlando had agreed to take half. Otherwise, the horse would never have carried them and the luggage. Laughing, Hexian agreed with her, adding that although the weather was good, blankets wouldn't hurt in case they had to stay longer than one day. He flinched before finishing speaking, as a familiar, sharp voice mockingly asked if they were going on a picnic. Adele's mouth was open, and she was trying to see who it was, but the voice was saying that so many things were needed for a picnic. Karan was standing behind them. Of course she asked what he was doing here. The young man smugly noted that he had not crossed the Grand Duke's threshold, so he would not be able to kill him so easily. Hexian, the words that he and Adele were currently on a date, and that all sorts of suspicious types were interfering, made Karan jump. The knight clearly enjoyed the sight of Karan, calling him his brother-in-law and asking him not to interfere with the lovers' date, but to simply leave. Adele sweated from these words, and Karan felt as if lightning had struck him. In his usual style, the guy rushed at the Duke, shouting why the hell he was calling him brother-in-law. Hexian chuckled and reminded that the Emperor had already given his consent to the wedding, so it was inevitable, and it had to be acknowledged that such a scoundrel as Karan was his brother-in-law. While he took off shouting what kind of nonsense this was, Hexian suggested that Adele take a shortcut, especially for Karan. In order to irritate him even more, Hexian noticed that as soon as they crossed the threshold of the palace, obstacles immediately appeared, suggesting that they hurry from the words of this foul-mouthed man. Of course, Karan rushed after them, and the Duke suggested that Adele pick up the pace and hurry, as dealing with this guy was too tiring. And as soon as they go deep into the forest, they will go on foot, adding that it would be nice to take Karan somewhere deeper and finish him off. Adele sighed. Sometimes her fiancé scared her. Hexian understood to himself that this Karan Vita was not so simple, even though he had gotten rid of him yesterday. But he didn't understand why he was so obsessed with Adele, and upon arriving at the place, they decided to continue on foot. Karan looked at them and asked where they were going. Adele was already irritated by this persecution and asked why he really didn't go home. There was absolutely nothing to do here. Karan shrugged her shoulders in confusion and said that he had simply gone for a walk. Hexian and Adele started joking that maybe they should just finish him off now, and that's it. After walking for some time, the knight noticed something strange. All this time, it seemed to him that they were going in the right direction. The girl also noticed that after walking for about 20 minutes, they did not notice a single sign. Hexton agreed that they needed to leave signs and began marking the land. Karan immediately asked what they were sniffing around here about. Our heroine started screaming, asking how much longer can she bother them. Losing her temper, Karan shouted that this bastard didn't let them talk yesterday, and in general, why the hell she was carried into this forest. Hexian stopped, watching their squabble. Karan was clearly offended that Adele did not talk to him, and then they began to reproach her that she did not want to return home and did not want to see him at all. At that moment, a stone flew past Karan's face, grazing his cheek. Hexian threw this stone with force, who commented without emotion that he wanted to make a mark on the tree, but accidentally missed. From such obvious mockery, Karan, bursting into curses, was ready to tear him to pieces. Hexian called him a common poser who would run away with his tail between his legs, so he suggested settling everything in a fair fight, man to man. Hexian easily restrained him, saying that Karan had no chance in a fistfight either. He called Karan nothing less than a child. Otherwise, if he had even a drop of tact, he would not have behaved like that. Seeing the helplessness of a family member, Wit Hexian mockingly commented on this method of attracting attention as highly questionable. Adele stood to the side, watching the duel and verbal altercation with fear, in which Hexian was clearly winning. Hexian told Karan to keep his head down and finally learn to accept lessons and generally know his place. Karan finally lost control and struck with all his might. Adele screamed in fright. But he saw how Hexian glanced at him with a smile and chuckled. Karan realized that he did it on purpose. Adele was already rushing towards him. The girl moaned about how much pain it must have been, and Karan was indignant that he had deliberately allowed himself to be hit. While she was fussing around with her fiancé, Karan asked her to think about the fact that Hexian had staged the whole thing, but the girl stated that he had never learned to control his emotions. In response to her remark that he always only hurts everyone, the guy tried to justify himself by saying that he had also been injured. But Adele was preoccupied with caring for Hexian. Karan snapped his teeth angrily and snorted that she had made a fuss out of nothing and was hovering over the Duke like a mother hen. He abruptly threw something at her, saying that if she cares about him so much, then let her smear it with this. In her hands lay a small jar with the family crest. Karan said that this ointment would heal the wounds in a few minutes, and while Adele was providing first aid and cooing, and Hexian, blushing, said that he could do it himself, Karan was spitting and cursing. They moved on, noticing that Karan was following them. But still, Hexian noticed that it was strange. It seemed as if they were walking in circles. He noticed their marks and tracks, and there were no other marks. Adele suggested that this could be the work of fairies like last time. Karan muttered that he knew a lot of rumors about this place. No matter how far you go, you will still return to the beginning of your path. Our heroine asked what he was talking about. Then Karan told her that at the exit from the forest, he caught a bandit who told her about these oddities. When he wanted to move their base into the thicket of the forest, some of the people disappeared. At dawn, they went in search of them. They found the people, but they no longer looked like people. Then the girl thoughtfully concluded that perhaps this place reveals its essence at dawn. The Duke suggested setting up camp before sunset, and lamented that now the tent would have come in handy. Karan's eyes widened. He couldn't believe that they were actually going to stay here until dawn, sleeping on the dirty grass. Even Adele. Then, giggling, Hexion declared that they had a mattress and blankets, but his brother-in-law would have to curl up on the grass. In any case, no one cared about him. They made a fire. Evening came. Karan asked her why she never told him that her father treated her like that. Adele chuckled that she would trust a scoundrel like him. Hexion was silent as he listened to them bicker. Adele recalled his cruel jokes. Karan agreed that he sometimes crossed the line, but these were just jokes. Then, even after such a long absence, he was not informed of what was happening. He did not even know that she would leave them. He said that if she wanted to escape from the estate, she would have turned to him. He would have found her a house. Our heroine considered this a mockery and replied that she was not crazy. She sarcastically suggested that he would find her a house in the forest and scatter animal corpses around it. At these words, Karan beamed like a child, realizing that she had opened his gift, while he thought that she had simply thrown it out into the hallway. Adele was so angry that she was not going to listen to anything else, and Karan awkwardly explained that it was a rare white wolf, and if she washed it, it would make a good gift. He tried to say something else, but the girl had already gone to bed with her ears covered. Here, Hexion intervened, pointing to Adele, who wanted to sleep, and asked not to be so annoying. When the knight mentioned again that he was getting under their feet, Karan growled that he knew about his rotten soul. Hexion reminded him of his actions, noting that Karan should have knelt before Adele and asked for forgiveness, although it would have been better for her if he had completely severed all ties with her. Karan growled at Hexion that he was a bastard. At some point, a sound was heard, and the men jumped. Everything around began to change. Adele stood up, watching the magic. The girl looked at the glow in fascination, saying that this was the very path. Spiritual energy paved the way for them, to which Hexion urged them not to delay. They walked along a path of radiance, and were at the finish line. Adele said that they must have ended up on the other side of the forest, and a couple of seconds later, a third obelisk appeared in front of them. The young people walked towards him without wasting any time. The writing on the obelisk shone with a bright light, but at dawn they would fade again. Hexion thought that it would be difficult for her to translate them, but for Adele, on the contrary, it was much easier. At that moment, they were distracted by some noise behind them. Karan, he wished. The girl realized that the road to the obelisk had disappeared, as it was enchanted. Hexion couldn't help but joke that the fairy magic was truly miraculous and helped her get rid of her brother-in-law. Hexion jokingly said that he was sure that if Karan had come close to the obelisk, the lady would have knocked him out with one blow. Adele sighed and told herself that she shouldn't worry about Karan. He had magic and could therefore find his way back. And until dawn, the girl was busy deciphering the obelisk. With the dawn, everything looked safe, and so she assumed that there would be no problem getting back. Hexion chuckled and said that his brother-in-law had apparently already reached their camp, and they should ask him to look after the horse. Adele seriously concluded that they know where the fourth obelisk is, but they need to be on guard. The knight asked if there was something dangerous written on the obelisk that deserved more attention, and the girl confirmed that she had read it on the runes in daylight. Opening her notebook, Adele said that if she were to summarize what she had translated at night, then this story was a continuation of the previous obelisk. She explained that at first it described Carlet's disease, the symptoms of which were unknown at their time, and then the events of that era are described in detail. This story became a legend for the inhabitants of their empire. It tells about the time of the founding of the empire, the era of the ancient kingdom that existed before the founding of the empire. It was then that there lived a man who dedicated his entire life to the good of the empire. He was called the guardian of the kingdom from his youth, for he was a great hero. The hero of this story is Haxenlight, and his humble friend with whom they fought on the battlefield. This priest was Alba Bestia. Adele concluded that all these events happened after a series of mysterious events happened to them in the forest. Our heroine hesitated, because if you look at the words that are used to describe Haxenlight, it turns out that he is a she, that is, a girl. Hexion opened his mouth, which was amazing even in their time, so that's why he was called a one-of-a-kind hero. The girl thought that in a world where only a man's strength counts, Haxenlight was truly an amazing person. She continued reading. The diary's heroine wrote that when she began to tire of everyone's attention due to endless wars, she had the opportunity to visit unknown places. At that time, there were rumors about Alba that he cured the plague epidemic in the capital just by saying prayers, and that the plague was caused by God's wrath. There were rumors that the mysterious illness would bypass true believers and those who accepted God's will, and only believing sick people would be granted healing. The Alba she knew was a quiet and shy guy, but he was not a liar. But these rumors still left a shadow of doubt in the diary's heroine, and so she left the forest to find Alba. Much time passed, and she found him after returning from the forest. But during this time, Albie had changed and become an outstanding personality. It was as if there was a different person standing in front of her, and the one with whom they fought shoulder to shoulder on the battlefield was not there. He chuckled, citing the fact that many years had passed, and he was curious about what she had been doing all these years. Alba started talking about the wonders she had found in the forest, but Haxenline asked about the rumors that were circulating about him. Is he really capable of curing that disease? He replied that one should not believe these rumors, but admitted that he had received truly divine power. From his words that this power was capable of consuming this country, and even the whole world, the girl trembled with shock. This man spoke like God. He was an ordinary priest, and this is what he has achieved now, and will gain more power in the future. But he needs a hero who is trusted, and whom people are ready to follow. Alba imperiously extended his hand to her, offering to become the gods of this world. She had seen so much. Didn't she want to change this world so that it was at her feet? She saw how his eyes turned scarlet, so she knew there was no mistake here. In response to her reaction, Alba said that he was very sorry. He had hoped until the very end that she would be on his side. Today he let her go, but said that she could come back if she changed her mind, and he was looking forward to it. It was their last conversation after so many years of separation. After this, Haxenlight rushed into the forest as if a horde of monsters were chasing her, all because she knew the reason for his radical changes. She had a bad feeling about his changes. Even the thought that she would not see the old Alba was disconcerting. As our heroine finished reading the last lines of the message's owner, Haxenlight wrote that her heart was breaking with pain. Hexion shuddered at her tears, and Adele herself could not explain why she was crying so much. Adele admitted that these were not her feelings, as if Haxenlight's feelings and emotions had penetrated her soul. The memories of those days became part of her being, a precious friend to whom she could trust her life. No matter how hard she tried, Adele still couldn't control her emotions, even though she understood that these weren't her feelings. Seeing how she was trembling, Hexion couldn't believe that all these emotions were from the translation of the obelisk. The knight himself was at a loss, not knowing what to do. If she continued to cry, she would be exhausted. He thought about it and realized that since she was now feeling what the author of the messages felt, what if Adele's feelings overshadowed Haxenlight's feelings? The Duke decided to try to bring the girl to her senses and turn to her. Tears were still streaming down her face, but she switched to this situation and with wide eyes, tried to ask what he was doing. Hexion explained his action by saying that if she was surprised, she would stop crying, and this began to work. Adele was still trying to understand what he meant when the knight began to approach and hug her again. Blushing with embarrassment and attraction to her, he whispered, "But she doesn't want to try." After which he kissed her on the lips while hugging her. He felt Adele squeeze his shoulder and hold her breath, both of their hearts racing. Then she pulled away, breathing heavily and gasping with emotion. But after just a couple of seconds, Hexion closed her mouth again with a kiss. After some time, he asked if she was okay and if she found him disgusting. Embarrassed, Adele turned her face away in shame and stuttered quietly, replying that not at all. He noticed that she seemed to have stopped crying, and our heroine noted with surprise that she had indeed lost touch with the emotions of the owner of the inscriptions on the obelisk. Now she blushed because of their kisses and babbled that since everything was fine with her, she needed to find her way home. And then a familiar voice was heard, saying that all people are like that. They act like that at the slightest thing, and nothing bothers them. Adele immediately recognized the fairy, who, it turns out, had been watching them from the very beginning of their stay in the forest, and also noticed that this guy, meaning Hexion, no longer smelled so much of a curse. What also surprised the fairy was that even greater power began to emanate from Adele. Although she had received the fairy's blessing, she still shouldn't be so strong. As a result, the creature could not understand how a simple person could possess such power, and seeing the complete incomprehension and surprise on the girl's face, she asked if she still didn't understand how to use the power. The girl said that she assumed that everything would work out on its own, but the fairy interjected that she should have been asked about everything first. She broke into a smile and sweetly said that the more often Adele touched this boy, the faster he would recover. And she winked, like, they're such a couple, so why not try for the sake of their loved one, which completely confused our heroine. They could touch each other, Now Adele began to understand why, when she touched him, he felt better. But Hexian, who was standing there, could only guess what kind of dialogues Adele was having with the fairy, invisible to him. The pleased fairy said that since she told her such a thing, then well done, and Adele should praise her, which she did, carefully asking her to tell her how to get out of this place. She grabbed. For some reason, Adele knew where the shortest route was and walked quickly, leading Hexian. Coming out, Karan, leaning against the tree trunk, looked at them. To Adele and Hexian's simultaneous question about what he was doing there, the guy replied that he just decided to take a walk, while Adele tried to make him admit that he was following them. At this time, the Duke announced that he had loaded everything and they could go. While Karan was yelling why she was ignoring him, they heard extraneous sounds. The men stared in the direction from which they were coming. Something was flying at them. Karan managed to push Adele away. People in black robes came out to them. One of them said not to look for the obelisks anymore, and he warned that if they let this go in one ear and out the other, next time they won't get away so easily. Karan, the boy's eyes filled with fear when he was addressed as Mr. Wit, and warned that if he continued to behave in this manner, the reputation of the duchy could deteriorate. Karan began to ask incessantly what this meant, and how they were going to harm the ducal family, but the strangers left without answering. Adele understood that since these people were threatening Karan, they were not the Duke's subordinates. Hexian stood in silent tension. Everyone walked in silence until Adele asked Karan if he remembered why she didn't want to listen to him, simply because she didn't trust him, but she offered him to prove that he was not on the Duke's side. Karan didn't understand much yet, and Hexian also couldn't understand why she was saying this. Karan was puffing and angry, but Adele's firm voice demanded an answer. Finally, the girl told him to come to the sewing workshop near the studio after lunch. They would meet there, and she would tell him what to do. Karan yelled, "What kind of man would come to the sewing workshop?" As an option, Adele suggested putting on a cape, so they came to an agreement. Our heroine warned him not to let the Duke follow him. So they will be able to get the notebook with the decipherment of the obelisk's writings. If they go to the estate themselves, they will have a lot of problems. So wouldn't it be better to do it through someone the Duke trusts? Still, Hexian doubted it because Karan could peek into the notebook, and approaching the Duke's estate, even if the studio was not too dangerous. Adele was confident in the plan, declaring that she would never allow anyone to peek into the notebook, and smiled, adding that if anything happened, her Black Knight would be with her. With these words, they said goodbye on the stairs. Adele needed a good rest. Then the girl remembered that tomorrow she was going to meet a man and asked if he was free. For his lady's sake, Hexian was willing to clear his schedule. They agreed to meet for lunch, after which Adele ran into her room and slammed the door with relief. She hid her burning face in her hands, praying for this day to end quickly. That kiss of theirs in broad daylight, her feelings for him. Could the fairy have told the truth? And was this so necessary for both her and Hexian? While Adele was thinking about how she could now look Hexian in the eyes, he sat there, all dejected and thoughtful. The young Duke wondered what the hell he was doing, realizing that he was desiring Adele more and more. The next day, they rode in complete silence. No one knew what to say. They both tried not to look each other in the eyes. Our heroine replayed yesterday in her head. Had lunch, had a snack. It passed like a moment. Now she feels embarrassed every time she crosses his gaze. And after the trip to the forest, they hardly spoke to each other. Hexian was also nervous. Trying to squeeze out a carefree smile, and seeing how she looked around, he asked, "Perhaps she was uncomfortable." The girl nervously squeezed out that everything was fine, trying to hide her nervousness, and noticed that they were already there. The knight asked in surprise if this huge building was really the Information Guild. The girl confirmed that her childhood friend lives here, and she has been here before. Hexian came out to help get Adele down. How her face lit up when she saw Jin, who came out to meet her. When she asked if he had really come out to meet her, the guy still sternly answered that he had, and adding that there were too many eyes around, he suggested going inside. When they entered the office, Adele introduced Jean as her childhood friend who took care of her and moved on to the topic of his current activities. But she was shocked to learn that Jin was the leader of this guild. Although she understood that he was not the last person, but to be the leader, Jin himself, looking at Hexian, asked that he was the same Duke of Militrio. Jin also added that Hexian took Adele from the Duke's house, posing as her fiancé, and now they live under the same roof. Adele became nervous about such details, asking how Jin knew all this. But her childhood friend calmly explained that for the Information Guild, this was a piece of cake. Jin also said that there were rumors around town about his death, and that's why he wanted Adele to come here. Our heroine felt like sparks were flying around the men. Hexian said that, apparently, this guild has spies all over the empire, and it wouldn't be a mistake to assume that they even have spies in the palace. Jim confirmed this, adding that he also knows that His Majesty the Emperor is much more selfish than the Crown Prince. Adele screamed, asking why he was saying such a thing, but Hexian calmed her down, simply saying that then Jin should know what he was going to do next. Jin nodded, talking about treason, but he didn't understand why if he was the Emperor's favorite child. He also asked that if there is treason, wouldn't it be the same as death for the Duke, since he receives medicine from the Emperor? Hexian chuckled. This guy even knew about the cure, which means there are too many gaps in the security of the Emperor's palace. It's time for Jin's eyes to widen at the words that now only Adele is capable of curing the Grand Duke's illness. Hexian said that the Emperor has long been ruling the country as his toy. He wants to restore the former greatness of the Empire, and even though his plan is dangerous, he cannot do it without Adel's help. Then in this case, he is ready to provide support with the help of his guild, but on the condition that Adele is not involved in this. Adele screamed that she had already said that it was her choice, and she was ready to face the threat. But Jin was adamant. Jin said that before she got too deep into this, she should back off. He didn't want to lose her again. Our heroine could barely hold back tears of indignation, and said that she chose this path precisely so as not to die. She trusts Hexian, and chose this path precisely because she has already met death once, and knows a lot, because this is the only way she can change her destiny. Her speech that she needs Jin, and if he doesn't want to lose her again, then let him help her touch the guy's heart. With a soft smile, she remembered how he had extended his hand to her in that alley when she was a child, and promised to someday repay him for that kindness. The guild leader sighed heavily. How could he resist such a speech? And after a couple of seconds, he announced the price in 1,000 gold bars, believing that it would be affordable for the Grand Duke. Jin argued that if the guild failed, all members would face inevitable death, so such a price was not comparable to the risk that Hexian's mission entailed. Adele was still shocked, because this amount was equivalent to the budget of one country. Hexian agreed to pay, noting that Jin had no idea how much wealth the Emperor had taken from the nobles during his reign. Therefore, in case of success, the knight promised to pay from the Emperor's personal treasury, but Hexian also set his own conditions. Before they could move on to the guild's goal, they would need to obtain a lot of information and complete several assignments. Jin was not opposed to such a generous payment. His guild was ready to provide everything in the best possible way, but Jin also had a condition. Adele would remain in the guild under his protection. They have a lot to do, and it will be safer for Adele to be in the guild here than under the roof of the Duke's palace. Jin said that the Duke's palace was under constant surveillance, and if Adele was truly capable of curing his illness, then the Emperor could make it his weakness, to which he would reach out his hands. But Hexian objected that the engagement had already been approved by the Emperor and would soon be announced at the palace.